Danma was an enigmatic figure in the world of Alice in Borderland. Originally being a gigolo who inherited a hat shop from his deceased father, he was transported to the equally enigmatic and hellish world of the Borderlands, a place that could not and did not desire to change. During his time in the Borderlands, he learned this the hard way, after seeing many hopelessly die in the world's twisted death games and the world around them becoming more and more hopeless. He decided to stand up and be a beacon of hope to the players of the Borderlands. He wanted to create a place where all players would unite under a common goal. There would be no fighting one another, no backstabbing one another, none of the nonsensical depravity brought on by the Borderlands. Instead, they'd all work together to escape it and return to the normal world. He was even willing to delude himself and throw away his sanity with a lie to keep the hope and charm of his Utopia alive within the players. This would not only lead to the downfall of Danma himself, but his Utopia, the beach, as well. Overall proving that the Borderlands was a place that did not care for unity, utopia, or change, and would even punish those who tried, with his precious beach ultimately becoming the final game in the first stage of the Borderlands, the Ten of Hearts. Despite being a fictional character, his story and likeness has become the main icon of the channel for a greater part of half a year, and likely will continue to do so. His story can make an eerie amount of parallels to what I and many others have gone through in this community itself. This community has had a history of not wanting to change or have any positive people coming into it to change it for the better. Despite this, I and many others deluded ourselves into thinking that it would be open to change and could be saved, and that it cared for those who tried to make it a better place. Yet like Danma, that ended up being our downfall, and the downfall of our hopes and visions of Utopia. This community has never once cared for those who tried to help and care for it, only allowing them to act as circus monkeys before throwing them away in their own twisted games and spitting them out afterwards. This is why I and many others have begun to leave this through our own means, with some leaving on good terms while others leaving on bad terms. One of those people leaving on bad terms includes myself. This video has been called a hymn, but it will not be a traditional hymn. It will not be a song of praise, a psalm, a carol, or an anthem to the community, but a harsh disavowing, a cacophony, and a poem of discord to it. And it won't stop at me just talking about how bad it is. I'll also give the creators who made it worse or pushed me and others further away from it their due recognition. Because again, this is no traditional hymn. This is a Novaric hymn to the community.
This for my kid. For when my kids have kids. Everything we did for the crib. Everything we did, how we live. All this smoke got a scent. All that smoke Kevin sent. Everything I spoke, what I meant. Never disguised my intent. Lines outside the event. Brought my life out the trench. God, thank God, look what he did. We off the grid.
Chapter 1. Alone in the Borderlands. So, you guys might be thinking I'm leaving because of the things involving the clay situation, but actually no. Like the Homeric hymn this video takes its namesake from, it can actually go back years in the past. Well, more like 3 rather than almost 3,000 like the original hymn. My reasoning for leaving the community goes back to 2020, basically. The year of COVID-19, community calamity with a whole bunch of drama and people doing really fucked up things, and just overall general insanity that I don't have the time or energy to cover. My first encounter that made me wane my delusion of the community being a good place is when I had an encounter with clay? Nah, no way, no fucking, oh wait, actually, yeah, that's what happened. Turns out, him and the community being asses isn't new. What a shocker, right? Jokes aside, this was actually a relatively uneventful encounter, but it encompasses something that not only was a common trend in the community before, but continues to be one now. and that is dogpiling and harassment. So this conversation with Clay starts off with me making, I guess, a dark joke about Miss Radioactive. I'm not sure what it was since I forgot to move or unclick the spoiler, but knowing me, it probably was just some fucking joke about Ukraine or something. Apparently the joke wasn't funny to Makoto or the deleted user, who, by the way, is Connor6510, another terrible and toxic person, by the way, since they properly made such clear, though Connor would take it a step further by calling in Clay and someone else, who I'm not sure who it is because, like Connor, they were also a deleted user. But knowing Connor, I'm assuming it was someone in Clay's posse. And Clay, ever the so macho man he is, joined in, saying my jokes are blander than NASCAR, which... Side note, if you ever have to roast somebody using NASCAR as a punchline, you just need to get your ass out of the kitchen and never cook again, because that shit, NASCAR jokes are not funny at all, and I don't know who hyped up Clay to make him think that they are. Anyways, let's get back to the point. Makoto and Clay seemed intent to just continue to lay into me about them being unfunny, which then caused them to, and admittedly I'm ashamed to say this, but play along and degrade myself because I just wanted them off my back. Keep in mind, I had no beef with them at this point. In fact, I'd only joined the server back in December of 2019, when I was 11 years old. Despite this, after my first day of joining, I didn't talk there for months until August of 2020. There was legit nothing I could have done, nor any reason for them to dislike me by that point, except for me being unfunny. This didn't seem to matter to them, since they kept going in, with Connor being especially guilty of this, drilling into me and calling me dumb. Need I remind you, I made a joke about an EAS OC. Mind you, Connor, who was drilling into me the most, was 15 at the time. Makoto and Clay, 16 and 19 respectively, drilling into a 12-year-old for a unfunny joke. I hope you guys are starting to see what I mean by this community has always been dog shit. Now, I must admit something. Rather than saying my actual age when joining Radio's server, I did lie about it and say that I was 13 rather than 11, which, by the way, Radio, I've already told her years ago and she's cool with it, so don't even try to bring that up as like some reason that, oh, Nova sucks. But even then, that leaves the assumption that a 15, 16, and 19-year-old were drilling into a quote-unquote 13-year-old for a difference in humor taste. A grown-ass man, an almost grown junior in high school, and a sophomore drilling into presumably an 8th or 7th grader for not being funny. Like, yeah, no shit, that's what 8th graders are known for. We're literally a whole school level apart. Of course our humor is going to be different. By the way, if anyone is still wondering where the beef between me and Clay came from, this is where it started. This incident also gave me my first true taste of the community, since something like this had never happened to me before, and I had the same thought process that I listed earlier, which caused me to gain two little neat things that I'm known for today. One, my combative attitude, and two, my mistrust and disdain for the community's more prominent creators. Now, granted, those two aspects definitely weren't as prominent in me as they are now, but for those who can't seem to understand why I'm like this in the community, well, look no further than your biggest idols. From that day forward, I knew the community, or at least the portion that Clay was respected in, which back in 2020 was basically fucking everywhere, wasn't gonna like me. So I would have to find people that Clay hadn't touched, which is how I stumbled across Saren. It was actually quite an odd meetup. We met because he was supposed to VA for Volcanic Winter Remastered, and he was one of the few people I met, along with Diamond later in early 2021, who wasn't affected by Clay's manipulation. and people always wonder why me and Saren are at each other's back whenever something happens in the community. This meeting of me, Diamond, and Saren would later include Forsaken, South Calman, Moldorito, Enwo, and Sleepy Farm Guy, is what our former friend group, aka the J, was made of, or I guess now, the beginning of the end. If there's one good thing I can say about the community, or one good thing it's given me, is that, well, the friend group, the beginning of the end. But even then, I can't give the community a whole lot of credit for that, since it was born out of my need to be liked and respected, since Clay and others had already done their work to ostracize me from the main community. Now you might be thinking, Nova, this is one major leap in logic. They made fun of you once, that doesn't mean they hated you or ostracized you. Well, strap your fucking seatbelts, because surprise, surprise, shit doesn't end in 2020. Clay and his posse, along with many others in the community like Motors and MSW, who also served to show to me just how ingrained this shit is in the community, continued to harass and fuck with me and others into the next year. It's also when I began to want to step up in the spot that I've become known for today. You know, the guy who exposes bad people and hunts for predators. It's actually quite poetic that I took such a, good role when 2021 was one of the worst times for the community. Well, why? Well, I'll tell you why. Let's get into it. Chapter 2. We'll create an ideal utopia. Now you guys might be thinking, Nova, why are you bringing up 2021 if it was the time period where not only you met your friend group, but developed a drive to keep the community safe and a good place? Which is a valid point. During this time, I actually didn't want to leave the community, but it did give me another taste of the true face of the community and how it actually operates, which back then was only something I kept in the back of my head, but with hindsight in mind, has only furthered my reasoning for leaving the community. It was around April after the MSW situation. Me and MSW were actually really tight friends months before, partially because of just good synergy, but also because our shared mistrust of the wider community, and me being a young and idealistic preteen back then, the actions of MSW weren't a warning sign that perhaps the community was not a good place and actually didn't foster good people, seeing as well MSW was literally a fucking racist and a doxer, and this behavior would only become the norm in the community. Instead, I took it as the opposite, that MSW was the exception, not the rule, and that someone just needed to stand up and fight back against these exceptions to keep the community safe and a good place for all. This is where you could say my drama arc started. You know, how people always say that me and Saren only do this shit to cause drama? Yeah, that's where this started. I would essentially become the pillar that holds the community up from the degeneracy that drags it down. But not only did it seem more and more like the community would just tune out degenerate after degenerate, but also that the community only seemed to give a damn or respect me and my friends when we were exposing these degenerates, as seen when the community would come together to give their condolences and praises to me for when MSW was harassing me and that I was exposing him and his racism, but also rallied around, guess who? Clay again, when he decided to make me the punching bag of his day in Radio Server. There was an instance in Radio Server where everyone was making jokes about her being dead because she was offline for a while. And I made a joke, something along the lines of, she's dead because I killed her and now I'm the server owner, or some shit like that. And Clay, completely unprovoked, tried to insult me and say, dead like your humor, and once again causing the Glazing Brigade to come down on me again and rally behind him against me. But you see, I had learned from 2020, I wasn't just going to be a bitch to Clay again, and I was actually going to fight back this time. So I clapped back with dead like your content variety, which actually got people to rally behind me for once, which did feel good, I'm not gonna lie. Clay didn't have the best response either, saying, bitch, your only variety is your fetish for supernovas. Which, what? How is that even a roast, man? Y'all gotta keep Clay out of the fucking kitchen, cause who let this nigga cook? Who let him think that he could cook? He clearly can't, and he showed that when I only responded to him saying two things: the Wedge 3 and you have over 200 radios. Isn't that a radio fetish? Or something along the lines, to get him to crack and become defensive, saying that he only had 40 radios, which, yeah, that proves my point. What normal human being do you know has weather radios in the double fucking digits? Most people I know, even in the community, only have 1 to 3. And this guy has 40. So, you're kind of proving me right with the radio fetish allegations, Clay. I'm just saying. We then stopped for a bit until radio jumped in and told us to chill, which I teased us for, saying that she was late as fuck. Now, if it ended here, I would have just thought that Clay was looking for violence, just being a nuisance and wanting to roast people, which is fair. We all get a little devious, but that quickly shattered when he reacted to radio's message telling us to back off each other with an eye roll emoji, meaning he was legitimately annoyed at a 13-year-old for flaming him. Not only did that prove to me how fragile and petty Clay was, but also showed me how stagnant the community had been since 2022, seeing as not only was Clay going after children unprovoked again, which he's done that a lot recently, but in a different way, but also that the community was all for dogpiling supposed randoms and switching up on people they formerly liked because the big shots didn't like them, which did worsen my image of the community, but I was still persistent and wanted the best for it. This began to waver a little bit when I started interacting with the people most highly regarded in the community, such as Miss VR, aka Lady Crystal, Derpy Fire Alarms, and ThunderBuddy01, who were all either straight up assholes, really stuck up and viewed extremely highly of themselves, or just not good people to be around, which made me want to associate with the community less and increase the aforementioned combative attitude. This attitude would be pushed further when the entire community ganged up on my friend, EAS Ohio, for making a troll bid on a rare radio. I went over this some more in my Dear EAS Community Go Touch Grass video, but it was legit just like usual, a whole bunch of grown adults ganging up on a little kid because they couldn't get their precious bleep bloop plastic radio. Legit scapegoating EAS Ohio and even trying to fearmonger a confession, which is funny considering, like I said in that video, they were fucking celebrating and congratulating when Recom did it, calling him an amazing troll. Not only does it reinforce what I said about the community being immature and going after children, in more ways than one by the way, but also the community only caring about those in their groups and circles. And if someone big in the community doesn't like you, you get isolated and turned into a scapegoat. RMWX versus Forsaken is another great example of this, and also when I saw for the first time just how the community will go against their better judgment just so that they can get rid of someone they don't like or perceive as a threat to the status quo, something I'd experienced later myself. RMWX said the video he made about Forsaken was a slanderous hit piece and that it was only meant to tear down Forsaken, yet the entire community seemed to ignore that, as well as the obvious warning signs there with RMWX being so defensive of Astra and Nina at the time, as well as the fact that, in all honesty, Forsaken wasn't even in the wrong. It was only when I stepped up and called out this bullshit in my response to Mind Your Own Business in defense of and against EAS Forsaken, where I critiqued Forsaken as a person for his jokes and overall annoyingness at the time, but also RMWX for how he conducted himself, even throwing shade at the community for being, as I put it, hypocritical as always. It was only then when people began to change, but even then, not a whole lot of people did. They just said, I respect your opinion, and continued to harass Forsaken, which I did eventually end up calling out in my Leave Forsaken Alone video, where I called out their community for some of the common trends and behavior that I've covered previously in this video, such as the scapegoating adults harassing minors and the overall dogpiling of anyone that doesn't fit into what they do. In fact, I even called out how this type of behavior perpetuates and brings the rise of some of the biggest quote-unquote enemies of the community, like Motors, MSW, or as mentioned in the video, Rosin. Y'all really think me calling out the bullshit of the community and disliking it was just a 2020 thing? Nah, I was doing the shit back in 2021. I'm really just him like that. On a more serious note though, the first time I was ever legitimately disgusted by the community was during that same RMWX situation, and seeing all the twisted, depraved shit that RMWX said and did, while also getting to speak to Astra herself about it. It really opened my eyes to how fucked this community can be, and especially opened my eyes to how normalized this style of behavior is in the community. Sexual jokes involving adults and minors, openly talking about sex in depth, and parasocial relationships between adults and minors, with prominent members pushing this type of behavior in the community being people like Aldrich, Antonio, Cherry, or Pittsburgh EAS, and even Clay himself. Still, I didn't want to leave the community. Instead, I wanted to look for and confront these people whenever they reared their ugly heads and help make the community more aware of these warning signs. This is where you could say my pedo hunter arc started, and also when I started getting more cynical and blunt with how I went about it, especially when I learned about people like SSTEAS, who the community didn't even have an inclination was a pedo until he was arrested by the authorities, proving my belief that the community had become desensitized to these types of, warning signs, and furthered my cynicism and bluntness towards the community, which again, while not as prominent in 2021, was kicked into full gear in 2022. But we'll talk about that in a little bit, just wait. From then on, people like Motors, Michael S., Fire Fanatic, TV Antenna, who was another groomer who actually tried to groom me, by the way, Western Mass EAS, who was also another groomer but didn't try to groom me, he tried to groom Astra, unfortunately. Plus the fact that they all seemed to either go under the radar until I called them out in the case of Western Mass, or they slipped up themselves in the case of TV Antenna. This really began to wane my respect for the community and increase my disdain for it, and brought into question whether or not this community could, or I guess a better way of putting it is would, be willing to actually change. Chapter 2.5, Pattern of Behavior. Quick aside for a second, but do you guys ever realize how fucking common racism is in this community? Like, legit, so many people get exposed for this shit, and their first encounter when any person of color comes up to talk to them is to attack their race. MSW, Western Mass, Motors, Michael S., even fucking Derpy Fire Alarms and Clay have done this shit. And it's so fucking crazy how ingrained it is in the community when you actually peel back a few layers, whether it being prominent white creators like Derpy Fire Alarms and Clay being able to sling the hard R, yet never being so much as called out. But whenever a black person attempts to do something that's not even that bad in comparison, like, say the fucking word they reclaimed, they're dragged for it. Or whenever they begin to talk about something like this or call this behavior out, they're either ignored or told off. Like, it's to the point where in 2020, 2021, and even 2022 to a degree, I legitimately felt like I had to hide being black or not express myself fully because I'd face backlash for it. Like, legit, I remember in radio server I would say nigga casually and be told off by the fucking mods and muted for it, to the point where I basically had to fight with radio and the mod team to get them to chill and let me use the word that, my race reclaimed, but apparently they can't ban others who were white and using the derogatory form, the actual fucking hard R at people because, they did it years ago. When prominent white creators are allowed to sling slurs with no consequence, while small black creators are punished for calling it out or using slang terms their race reclaim. They get told off and even punished. You have to admit there's an issue with the racial subjects in this community. And with how many people try to tell me it's not because of race, even when there is clear racism in the community, it makes it even more of an issue. Even people who I still respect to this day, like Harvester and Electric Fanatic, fall into this trap, which goes to show how gated and white dominant the community really is, to the point where even well-meaning people like them can't seem to see or call out racism when it happens. I mean, I guess that should be expected when I can literally count on my hands how many other black creators I've seen in the community over my almost 4 years of being here. Let's see, there's Tyrick Mate, VBEAS, the teen from North Georgia, Michael M, 357, and Helix. That's 5 people. Fucking 5 over the course of 4 years. I wonder if the predominantly white community with racist big shots is racist? Which obviously, seeing as I'm not white, is one of the many reasons I've chosen to leave this dumpster fire of a community. However, since we do have a shit ton of other stuff to go, and since I plan to make a more in-depth video about being black in the community, I'll leave it there for now and get back to the main focus. My questioning of whether or not the community could actually change would continue onwards into 2021 and 2022, as I began straying further and further from the main community and actually being able to get outside perspectives who confirmed to me and agreed just how fucked this community truly was. Not just the racism, but the scapegoating, the doxings, the pedophilia, the harassments, the dogpiling, constantly having to tell and watch grown men and women go off on or catcalled and make sexual jokes with children who weren't even in fucking high school, then getting banned and harassed for it, was starting to get me honestly fed up with the community at the end of 2021, and I was starting to become more and more jaded and cynical about the community. This would all seemingly culminate in a boiling point in 2022, as everything would get much worse. In fact, 2022 alone could probably account for 50% of the reason I'm fed up with the community. So let's get into it. Chapter 3. The Beach is Founded. Since we're still here, let's go over everything that's happened so far. I've seen a community where being an asshole is justified and incentivized whenever you have more zeros in your sub count than someone. Seen a community full of racial hypocrisy and bias, flat out legitimate racism in some cases, and a community not being willing to call out that racism or even see it when it happens. I've seen a community so open to and normalized with sexual jokes between minors and adults that it's considered taboo to call it out rather than engage in. I've seen a community that can't for the life of it identify predators or see the warning signs because of their aforementioned sexual carelessness. I've seen a community that is deeply hypocritical and allows people to get away with whatever so long as they're friends with the right people and never takes accountability for it, while going after those that aren't friends with the right people if they're the slightest bit annoying. And a community that regularly produces racist harassers and doxers like MSW, Motors, EAS New York, RMWX, etc. You would hear all of this and see it as understandable why someone wouldn't want to stick with this community, right? Maybe even seeing it as virtuous that someone would want to stick around and fight tooth and nail to make it a better place. Well, for those who see it as the latter, unfortunately the community doesn't look at it the same way as you. And for the former, well, again, you better buckle your fucking seatbelts because shit is about to get a whole lot worse. So, the start of 2022 was actually pretty chill for the community. I still had some of the bad taste in my mouth left over from 2021, and nothing seemed to be getting better, so the taste remained there. But hey, at least things didn't get worse. So, that's a plus. Wait, nah, I'm just fucking with y'all. MSW was back and he was ready for the violence, with him completely doxing Radioactive Girl with her face and legal name, if I recall correctly. This had happened, mind you, 4 days after New Year's. 4 days into 2022, and someone had already been doxxed. This had indicated to me that MSW at least hadn't changed. This had the community in a firestorm, as it was literally Radio, who at the time was the biggest EAS creator barring Hermitage and EAS Experience, getting her entire online privacy breached. That's a pretty big fucking deal. And you know, I'm actually glad. I'm glad the community finally grew a soul and rallied behind Radio for this, because she deserved it. Fuck doxers and fuck MSW. If there's one thing I can praise the community for, it's that. But despite that praise, keep this whole situation in mind for a little bit. It'll come up later, trust me. After January, things settled down a little bit until late January, early February, where I reached 1,000 subscribers and had the unfortunate displeasure of meeting my 1,000th subscriber, Easy West. At first, he was actually cool, until I got added into a group chat with him, Hero Wise, Homelessville, Dixie Doe, and Saturn Storm, where it was just sexual joke after sexual joke, pibby simping after pibby simping, and the whole group chat was just fucking okay with it. I was legit the only person who found this uncomfortable there, or wrong. Everyone else just found it a silly little tee-hee jokey joke, further going to show how desensitized this community was. Now, ashamedly, I did brush this off a little bit, since not only was he my 1,000th subscriber, and by this point my friend, but also because nobody else in the chat seemed to have an issue with it, so I brushed it off and thought I was just the weird one. Well, that was for about a day or two, till he posted CP to the group chat, to which I had some choice fucking words for him. And after that, I left the group chat and vented about it to my friends, where, you know, you guys know the rest. Me and Saren hopped on an investigation, West got exposed, yada yada yada. But there's something interesting to note here. Many members of the community actually stood up for West. I'm not joking. There were big names like Hero Wise, Homelessville, and even Dixie Doe defending him before he came to his senses and acted as a double agent, though he would once again lose them, but we'll get into that later. This honestly wasn't a shock to me at the time, since I initially didn't even want to come forward with West, because I knew some shit like this would happen. People would excuse it as jokes or not that serious. It just goes to show how the community being fucked happened far before Clay, that the community can't pin all of its depravity on Clay. This would become even more clear when they tried to hop on disguise accounts and infiltrate my server to find anything remotely bad about me that they could use to slander me. But they came up dry, since, as it turns out, despite what the community and the big shots will have you believe, I'm actually a pretty mellow person, just standoffish. They only apologized for it after we called them out in Saren's Let's Talk About It video, by the way. And even then, Hero Eyes never fully apologized, just disavowed the Pibby stuff. In fact, his younger brother, Vexalo, is still angry at me and Saren, and while he backed off in December of last year, he still goes after Saren to this day. It's fucking concerning how when you present literal fucking evidence of someone possessing actual child porn, which, yes, as I said in the Clay video, even when drawn or lolicon is still illegal, the community will still try to defend that person and even go after you for fucking calling it out. Starting to see why I want to leave the community and have such a combative attitude towards the members of the community. And this isn't even the worst of it. There's much more to cover, but I want to keep the video chronological, so we'll get there. You guys remember when I said, this community has never once cared for those who try to help and care for it, only allowing them to act as circus monkeys before throwing them away in their own twisted games and spitting them out afterward. Well, a prime example of that was seen here, as after the West situation, me and Saren actually became pretty widely known and regarded as pedo hunters in the community and the people who would step up to keep the community safe, despite us having done it for a whole year at that point. I guess that didn't really matter to the community, however, when I would end up getting targeted and doxxed by MSW himself, akin to how Radio did, except mine was arguably worse than hers, since not only was my name and face leaked, but also my address, my former address, my school, and even my fucking grandma's face and name. Which, as I've said in the past, you go after me and slander me all you want, but you go after the ones I care about and cherish, like my grandma, that's when I start having issues. But the community didn't seem to care that much. Remember when I told you guys to keep in mind the community's reaction to radio being doxxed? Yeah, I wanted you guys to keep that in mind, since when it happened to me, nobody batted a fucking eye. There was, I think, radio and the beginning of the N group chat, as well as my own audience, who actually gave a damn, but the wider community didn't. Mind you, literally a few days ago, from the moment of this happening, which was March 22, by the way, people were praising me and Saren for taking down West. Yet when my legitimate safety and privacy was on the line, nobody cared, which was really eye-opening for me.
Are you serious? I swear my money is serious. Okay, all my checks, I just be clearing it. She said my dick that she get delirious. Okay, jump on the jet so I'm clearing it. Okay, pop, but I'm not talking new. Okay, smoke that boy just like a cigarette. If that boy try to make a fuss move. Loot Uzi Vert? Dude, loot, dude. Thank you! Little Uzi Vert leaves. You're supposed to be staying still right now. Ready, set, go.
And began to make me want to disassociate with it more, and mostly just stay around my own circles. That is, until a certain woman showed up, and you'll never guess who I'm talking about. It's Sarunia. I'm talking about Sarunia. Now, at the start of summer, Sarunia was actually pretty chill. She had a few weird takes and views every now and then, but for the most part, she was alright, though she would sometimes get very out of pocket, often starting arguments because other people rightfully called her out on her out of pocket comments. One of the most prominent people calling her out being me, Supernova Hypernova, because fuck letting this community slide. And it seemed like that really got under people's skin. But instead of critiquing Sarunia, who most of the time was the one who started them with me, or critiquing both of us, only I was critiqued. This, along with some instances in Ace's server, is likely where I got my reputation of arguing a lot and being petty. It got to the point where it happened seemingly every single other fucking day, and I had to essentially fight radio to get her to do something about it. And even back then, it wasn't until the whole white genocide thing, which was a month after all of her other comments about me, by the way, where radio actually stepped in and banned her, despite Sarunia having said at that point that I'd get groomed, raped, and become a mall shooter the month before, which is heavily ironic coming from the groomer, but we'll get to that later. For some reason though, the community seemed really hell-bent on defending Sarunia or trying to get me to back off, despite me being in the right, like, all of the fucking time, with even some people defending her white genocide talk by bringing up her mental illness, while also giving some 1000 IQ takes, such as, if you genuinely believe that white people aren't going anywhere or are under threat, you're a racist, let's be honest. Which is true. If you subscribe to the Great Replacement or white genocide theory, you are a fucking racist. But that wasn't the point we were trying to make. The point is that regardless of whether or not white genocide is realistic or even impending, she still called for it, among other things, even calling any person of color, including myself, who disagreed with her, as a race traitor. Even more racism, yay! And the community defended it. Man, no fucking wonder this community is a hellscape and I call it racist. Jesus fucking Christ, dude. Wanna know what's really funny too? Around this same time, West came back as first threat and people were actually forgiving him for what he did, saying that I actually was the one in the wrong, which honestly brought me to flat out hating the community, because how fucked in the head mentally do you have to be to say that the guy who owned, CP is better than the guy who exposed it just because you don't like them. See what I mean when I say that if you're liked or disliked enough, people will go against their judgment, and that this community has never once cared for those who try to help and care for it? It's on full fucking display here. And the worst of it is that this chapter only went over about half of 2022 and my reasoning for contributing to why I left the community. We still have September through December to get through, and trust me, it gets so much fucking worse, as you guys can already probably tell. This chapter alone was almost 3 pages longer than the previous chapter, which encompassed an entire fucking year. So Lord only knows what chapter 5 and 6 will bring. So again, fasten your fucking seatbelts and get ready for things to go straight to hell. Chapter 4, The Beach Begins to Fall. As I said, this is where shit gets real and things start going downhill, hence the name of the chapter. To be honest, in this chapter and the next, there's going to be a few call-outs, with one of those few people being called out being Ace, or ESS, Ace of Spades, as many people know him, since a lot of the way he and others have handled situations regarding me, his friends, my friends, and the community have contributed to me wanting to leave the community. By the way, to those of you questioning Sarah and calling Ace a narcissistic manipulator, this, along with the next few chapters, is where you should start to tune in, since he's not entirely wrong. So, before this event, I had been in Ace's server for not too long, about July or early August is when I first joined, coincidentally coinciding with the first Sarunia situation regarding her racism and harassment. The overall environment there was a mix. There were weirdos like RK and people who tried to police, or I guess a better way of saying it would be white-splaining, what I can and can't say as a minority, which is the common trend that we've seen in this fucking community if you've been paying attention to the video. But other than that, it was pretty chill until September, when people were talking about Ace's channel and it constantly being denied the YouTube partnership program for quote-unquote repetitive content. And I suggested one of the reasons why it might be is because how similar his screens look and how commonly he uses VHS/VCR style fonts like VCR EAS or VCR OSD Mono, which while it may sound laughable on its own, I did clarify that it may be one of the reasons, not the sole reason. Plus, I did a little comparison of my own, and if you look at Ace's screens compared to how they were months ago, they do look very similar, which, yeah, wouldn't you see how this would be deemed repetitive? Ace seemed to disagree with this assertion, which would be fine if it were just that. But instead of respectfully disagreeing, he started mocking the suggestion, and his fans began joining in, accusing me of a slew of things, such as favoring YouTube as a corporation over my fellow creators, which isn't even remotely true since I've been treated unfairly and called out YouTube far before I was ever monetized, and continued to do so afterwards. Now, some of Ace's fans may say, no, but this isn't Ace's fault his fans went after you. Ace doesn't have a say over what his fans do. This isn't the case. Ace would never once call out his fans for doing this or try to get them to chill, because both on this assertion and others, he agreed with them and even began to engage in some of the tactics they were, such as purposely misrepresenting my argument and what I'm saying, or trying to make an argument out of thin air, such as when I said that a myriad of other EAS creators do the same things that I suggested he do, and they tried to imply that it didn't have anything to do with their diverse content, just their skill, which isn't true at all. Not only is this a straw man, but also just straight up mob mentality. Ace said something, all of his fans stood behind them and began taking it to the extreme, and Ace did nothing to stop them. It got worse when another fallacy started, the ad hominem attacks, and people began attacking me or my content rather than addressing my arguments, saying things along the lines of, nobody wants to make the rise and fall of X creator videos, when I told Ace that I diversified my content and never came under pressure from YouTube, or saying that I don't care about the plight of Ace and what he's going through, and saying that I'm saying that he should bend over to corporations because I suggested that he try other content and maybe private some of his older ones, which is not at all bending to a corporation. If you're gonna make a big stink about being flagged for repetitive content, yet you don't want to do anything about it other than complain to your fans, what the hell are you even complaining for? To Ace's credit, he did call out YouTube publicly, but it was more him framing the situation as YouTube hating EAS content rather than what it actually was. He was too unwilling to change up his content or his style. The situation ended up fizzling out as I ignored them, and eventually the topic shifted to something else. You could argue this doesn't show Ace being manipulative, just either an ass or someone who can't control his fan base. That debacle, along with the aforementioned white-splaining and another incident I had with someone trying to steal my friend's content, gave Ace the perfect opportunity to paint me as a troublemaker and as someone who argues a lot and is unnecessarily combative to his server, leading to my image being essentially skewed by his fans, which is manipulative, like it or not, since it blasts all context from this situation into orbit and only shows me being argumentative, not why I was being argumentative, while also not giving me any leg to stand up on. And it doesn't end here, since in October, Ace ended up getting the perfect opportunity to slander me to his audience. For some context to this next part, Motors by this point had been relentlessly harassing and cyberstalking me and Saren, with him actually ending up funding Saren's school accounts and commenting shit all over his school's social media pages, as well as trying to pose as me across the community using pictures of my face. And the night before this incident, he had raided Ace's server, spamming porn and constantly pinging everyone, even specifically pinging me, Radio, and if I remember correctly, Saren. So I was pretty on edge in Ace's server the next day when I woke up to even more pings, believing that another Motors raid had happened. When I got to the server and checked the pings, however, it was not a Motors raid. Instead, one of the members innocently asking, a role that all the EAS creators get in the server, what their favorite scenario was. Then innocently asking if the server remembered some stupid incident in the community that she found funny, causing me to peacefully sigh in relief, but also wanting to let her know what was happening. So I said, "Hey, I hate to be that guy, but can you please stop the pings?" Which, at least to me, sounds very respectful and non-hostile. I even pointed out how kinda downy and annoying it seems to ask people to do that by saying, "I hate to be that guy," to which she politely responded saying, "Okay, sorry, just wanted to talk." You think this would be the end of the interaction, right? Sadly, it wasn't, since one of Ace's mods decided to come in and tell them to essentially disregard everything I said, and saying that I could mute notifications, which, while is fair, is a pretty tone-deaf assertion to make with the context of what happened last night, as well as my history in mind. I'll admit this got me pretty pissed off, since not only had I been constantly being disregarded in the server and the community by this point, but this mod in particular had been getting on my nerves during my time in the server, seeing as they always seemed to downplay anything I called out, such as white-splaining to me, saying I was overreacting in the aforementioned incident where I called out a guy for stealing my friend's content, and siding with Ace and strawmanning and using ad hominems during the font situation. So I wasn't having this guy's BS here, and promptly responding by asking him to shut up for once. And this is where things really began to go downhill. They began calling me a little prick, and essentially saying, why should I care about the Motors raid, when I brought up that it happened last night, even explaining how Motors was literally cyberstalking me, adding an extra layer of worry to the situation. To which he promptly responded by essentially belittling what I went through and my concern by saying, if you live in fear of this, why? He's a no life with nothing better to do, don't let it consume your life. which struck a nerve because of how ignorant he was being, to which I responded, telling him to stop talking on situations like he knows everything, going over everything I went over at the start of this portion of the video, the stalking, doxing, harassing, invasion of privacy, all that stuff. Want to know how this guy fucking responded? They belittled me once again, even essentially joking about it, telling me to go off the grid if I'm so worried and living in so much fear, since being on the internet allows him to get a hold of me. Which is obviously just a perfect solution when a guy knows where you live, who you are, what you look like, and can either do something as petty as sending a pizza or severe as swat you and potentially get you killed from it. I don't see how going off the fucking grid fixes that, but whatever. I stopped taking the guy seriously after that, just saying, you know what, I'm not reading all that. You want to know how Ace responded to all this? Did he get on the mod? Did he ignore it? Did he stand up for me? Nope, he told me to stop stirring the pot and calling me a shit stirrer before banning me. For the crime of asking someone to not ping everyone because a raid had just happened, I was banned, and the mod who belittled me faced no repercussion. In fact, I was scapegoated for this, as I said, being called a shit stirrer and once again being taken out of context by Ace himself, since one of my quote-unquote friends leaked a screenshot of me in a private group chat saying that Ace's server was on my dick. What Ace conveniently left out of the screenshot, however, was me right after that saying that Ace himself was cool, but his mod team sucked, which is something I believed back then, but obviously don't believe now. Both of them suck. This once again prompted Ace's server to dogpile on me, bringing up screenshots of stuff that I said or did that they took out of context, such as when I said that I don't believe America should be as obsessed with 9/11 as it is now, since not only is Osama bin Laden dead and the tragedy avenged, but also because every year the country is essentially re-traumatized by being shown the visuals of the tragedy, with me believing that the tragedy should be remembered in history books and memorials like the Holocaust was, rather than constantly re-traumatizing new generations and those who lived through the tragedy. Want to know what they interpreted this as? Me saying we shouldn't care about 9/11, or that people shouldn't moan the event or have their feelings about it, and I got fucking dragged for that, with the aforementioned mod even suggesting that my logic is akin to saying we shouldn't care about the Holocaust because it was 70 years ago, even though that was the exact opposite of what I was saying. Like I said, we should treat 9/11 more like we treat the Holocaust, make sure it never gets forgotten and remains forever preserved by the history books, murals, memorials, and overall education, but not constantly re-traumatized. Ace himself even made the hilarious assertion that my type of attitude, i.e. apparently not wanting to let people express themselves, is what led to the war in Afghanistan. Which, no. The war in Afghanistan has a long history that precedes 9/11, but that's getting into politics, something I don't feel like doing and is besides the point. So I'll get back on track. So, the funny thing is that during all of this, right, there is dogpiling and all that good shit. You want to know how that same mod who got on me responds to the situation? He says, no wonder this guy got fucking doxxed. I mean, I'm not justifying it, but seeing the way he acts, it's no wonder why it happened. And this is a guy who fucking Ace painted this guy as the fucking victim, that I was stirring the pot, which is I continued getting dragged for another good 2 hours or so, not only for the 9/11 takes, but also because just some other random shit they didn't like about me, until, guess what? Motors once again came and raided the fucking server. Now what do you think they did in response to this? Did they try to tighten server security, maybe even ignore it and kick the guy out like last time? No, they accused me of teaming up with and coordinating things with Motors as an act of revenge against them. I'm not making this up. They genuinely, after I explained to them how much I hate Motors and how he literally put my well-being at risk, accused me of teaming with them. Do you guys get why Saren and I call this guy a manipulator and a narcissist yet? This is not only scapegoating, seeing as they blamed me for all of my arguments, but also legitimate defamation and slander, all because they don't like me. This is manipulating your fans. Do you guys see why I say that if you're disliked enough, people will go against their judgment to hate on you? It's an actual fucking hive mind. Anyway, after that day, things sort of died down. The server moved on from me. That doesn't mean Ace's manipulation ends here. It actually only happens more as 2023 starts, but I want to keep this chronological, so we'll come back to it. We have more pressing matters to talk about, since funnily enough, the same day all this went down is the same day I was tipped off about Sarunia potentially being a predator. So let's get into that. We all know about Sarunia, or Grumia as I like to call her. We all know about her and what she did. We also know how the community responded to me calling out her racism. What you may not know about is how the community reacted to me joining the server to talk to them about Sarunia. As soon as I joined, they instantly assumed I was coming to talk shit with Sarunia. And while yes, it is true that my intentions for joining the server were to inform them of Sarunia, it wasn't to Sarunia's face. In fact, in the screenshot, I even asked one of the mods, who I'll keep anonymous, to not fight this fight for me and to just tell the mods to add me to conference so that I could explain myself to them. But they weren't having it, insisting that I would only be there to start shit, and according to Aldrich or Marcus, that my videos were drama farming and that it was only good for exposing West and MSW. I unfortunately don't have screenshots of this, though I think screenshots of me talking about it and one of the moderators backing it up is good enough. If you don't believe that it's good enough, that's perfectly fair. Take it with a grain of salt. Now, call me bad faith or call this an ad hominem, but I don't think it's surprising that the guy who was joking about sword fighting with Sarunia in a server full of minors is one of the most vocal ones on keeping the guy out who exposed her. It wasn't until the mod that I mentioned earlier began talking with them, convincing them that I wasn't there to start stuff, is when I was let into the server. And shocker, I didn't start anything. Scary, I know. Nova the shit stirrer didn't stir anything? No fucking way. Like I said before, I do only really have screenshots of me and this mod talking, so you likely aren't convinced, and like I said, if you aren't convinced, that's perfectly fine. Take it with a grain of salt. I'll be sure to update the description in the pinned comment should the screenshot resurface. Another thing you're probably thinking is, Nova, these screenshot dates say October 1st, and the ones you guys have about the Ace situation says October 8th. Which is when you were tipped off about Sarunia, which is an astute observation, viewer. The reason I bring this up is because this debacle is supposed to give context for when I spilled the beans about Sarunia to the mod team on the 12th. Remember, they were already hostile and unwilling to punish Sarunia, so could you guess how they were when I came forward? If you guessed questioning me and tried to pick apart everything I said, you'd be right. I had shown them evidence of Sarunia saying that she was in love with a 12-year-old and that she doesn't care about age in a relationship. Wanna know what they kept saying? How old was the victim? Do you have any way of contacting the victim and ensuring their age? How do we know it's not just someone posing as a minor to get at her? Which, this just showed that they didn't look over the fucking evidence, nor were even trying to ban Sarunia, just trying to reason whether or not she was actually in the wrong. I'll admit, I couldn't verify the victim's age, but as I say in the screenshots, even if the minor was actually an adult pulling a sting, that still shows that Sarunia was talking to what she thought was a minor, and that it's not much of an inconvenience to ban a racist, immature pedophile from their server, especially when, again, this pedophile admitted to loving a 12-year-old and not caring about age and relationship. That's a fucking red flag, guys. Why don't we get on that? I even called them out on this, saying that there was nowhere near this level of apprehension to Connor and RMWX when they got outed to the mod team. My guess now, Connor and RMWX were both disliked by the community much before they were outed, with RMWX being a major bully to Clay in the past, so it makes sense why the community would just be ready to kick him to the curb, no questions asked. Marcus then tried to pull up with some bullshit saying, "We're just trying to make sure these accusations can ruin someone's life." To which I pointed out how not only did this level of evidence already get her banned from communities in the past because their mods were smart enough to read over all the fucking evidence, and that even if a police investigation was opened up against her, that would mean that the allegations have somewhat of a leg to stand on if the actual fucking police are voluntarily getting involved, not mandatorily because it was reported to them, voluntarily. Radio then hopped in and essentially regurgitated what he said, even saying that someone might have had a vendetta against Sarunia, so they had to make sure, which I already pointed out earlier. Then they were suddenly shocked that I was getting so worked up over it. Like, oh, I don't know, maybe it's because you guys were ignoring other important evidence to play the what if game. Anyways, the mod team let me go over it. Sarunia was banned. The universe had been given a chance to heal. Until Thursday/Saturn Storm went ahead and leaked the evidence. Now, I actually thought I had covered this on some point in the channel, but it turns out I didn't, so I'll go over here. Saturn, after seeing all the evidence and what went down in Phoenix's conference chat, decided to not ask anyone if it was okay, but just leak all the evidence across Discord and Twitter, and if I recall correctly, YouTube as well. Now, you might be saying, why is this an issue, Nova? And that's because, well, me and Saren were trying to get police involved with the Sarunia situation, and if you've been paying attention to the internet lately, you know that EDP 445 never got arrested. That's because predator poachers leaked all the evidence onto YouTube and confronted EDP before calling the police, therefore making an act of vigilantism and unable to be used by local police. Saturn essentially did the same for Sarunia. Me and Saren were in the process of finding Sarunia's town and police department so that we could tip them off about Sarunia and get them on it before we went public, just in case the evidence was enough to get her arrested or at least summoned to court. But Saren threw all of that out of the window when he made the public aware of the evidence and essentially made himself, myself, and Saren go from people working in cooperation with police to vigilantes, therefore making evidence unreliable in a police investigation. As you can imagine, this pissed both me and Saren off to high hell. I called this behavior out in radio server and got a half apology, half excuse from the mod team, since while people were detesting Saturn for it, Phoenix's mod team were trying to avoid accountability by painting it as a lone wolf situation that they had no control over, to which I pointed out to the mods that it's still their fault for not having any confidentiality clauses or anything that holds their mods to privacy about this, like an NDA or something, which is something only me and Saren seem to do apparently. In fact, not even Radio's mod team was compassionate to stuff like this, which just furthers my desire to leave the community. Nobody wants to go after these people, and when they do, it's either they get clout, play moral high ground, or they fuck it up horribly. All three in the case of Saturn, actually. The pedo apologism doesn't help my desire to leave this place. Speaking of which, it's time for an event that everyone's been waiting for, an event that we all know and love, and it's a wild fucking ride and a combination of every pattern of behavior I've talked about before. So stop fucking taking your seatbelt off. Jesus Christ. How many times do I have to tell you guys to buckle up? Anyways, fucking keep your seatbelt on, start paying the fucking attention, because there's going to be a lot of things pointed out and a lot of connections made that you might miss if you aren't paying attention or looking carefully enough. Anyways, let's get into it. Chapter 5. 10 of Hearts revealed. The witch hunt begins. If my stature and reputation in the community, as well as my drive to protect the community, have been dipping in the last 2 chapters, well, this is where it really took a nosedive, and the delusion of this being a community of good people and people who care finally broke for me. You could say this is when the beach truly began to fall, and the 10 of Hearts game truly began, since if anything, this whole situation with Clay is definitely akin to a witch hunt. It started less than a week after the Sarunia situation when me, Diamond, and Clay were called in a conference chat because of an incident not regarding Clay, since we accused one of the mods of not only being racist, but also sending NSFW imagery to minors outside of the server. Did you catch that? Racism and NSFW being around minors, two things I've pointed out earlier. You know what? Congrats if you caught it, and pay attention if you didn't. It's only gonna get worse. The mods were, or at least seemed to have been, thoroughly disgusted with what that moderator did and ended up banning him from the server. I was still deluded by this point, so I thought that if Radio and the mod team was willing to ban a guy who had been with them literally since the server was created, that they'd be willing to hear me out with Clay. But you know, that's not how this community is. You know, that moderator I was talking about, yeah, he didn't have a comma in his subscriber count, so of course they were willing to kick them to the curb. I covered some of this in my multiple Clay videos, such as Stop Pretending Like You Care About Clay Ranger 143 and Clay Ranger 143 Defense Folder, the Peak of Desperation and Manipulation videos, but I mostly only went over what Phoenix and East Norcar WX did, not what else went down. So let's get into it. So obviously Clay was trying to stir us against going public with the info we had against him. So was Phoenix and so was Norcar. But you want to know who else was? Radio. You know how I said there was going to be some call-outs in these next few chapters? Yeah, well, Ace wasn't the only one. Radio has her fair share of calling out here. Now I know what you're all going to say. She apologized, blah, blah, blah. And we'll get to that in the next chapter. But for now, I'll cover this, since this video is about why I left the community. And to be honest, seeing this type of behavior from someone I trusted is a major reason why. Radio had basically enabled Clay. She saw what was going down in conference, such as Clay inviting people who shouldn't have been there, like Norcar, Phoenix trying to gaslight us into not going public with it, and the mod team overall being assholes to us. Not only did she not do anything about that, she said she was actually tired of me, and that what I was doing was sad. She says she wasn't defending what he was doing, but then later goes on to do exactly that. Defending what he did by saying he's not a groomer, and he never will be. Not only that, but she gets the very definition of grooming wrong, by saying that grooming involves abuse, which it doesn't. Grooming, as defined by the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, is when someone builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child or a young person so that they can manipulate, exploit, and abuse them. Abuse comes after grooming. Just because it doesn't occur before or during does not make it not grooming. Dictionary.com backs this up, defining it as an act of engaging in behaviors or practices intended to gradually condition or emotionally manipulate a victim over time, as through friendship, gifts, flattery, etc., in order to entrap the person in a sexually abusive or predatory relationship. Clay did all of those with Makoto. He was their friend when they had nothing else. He flattered them, gave them gifts, presented himself as a trustworthy person in order to get Makoto ready for his sexual abuse. He even became friends with Makoto's parents, which is another tactic of groomers. Wanna know who also employed these same tactics? RMW fucking X. He never once abused Astra. He cared for her, treated her like a diamond, flattered her to death, and made himself seem like a trustworthy person, because that's what grooming is. And that's exactly why I compared Clay's behavior and friendship to Makoto to grooming. Radio choosing to ignore this and get the definition of grooming incorrect is at best enabling and at worst criminal fucking negligence. As someone who was really fucking close to Radio, this was like a shot to the fucking chest. This woman, who had presented herself as a friendly person willing to help anyone, hear anyone out, all of a sudden turning into this whole different person who defended the scum of the earth. This woman whose shoulder I cried on and bended to about stuff I don't even trust my own family with, all of a sudden calling me the sad, upsetting, and pathetic one and dismissing what I had to say like it was nothing. And her saying that, oh, Nova, give her a fucking chance. It was just denial. That doesn't excuse a damn thing, especially when she pulled something similar in May of 2022, earlier this year. When we told her about the ERP and even fucking blaming Recom for the sexual activity around Clay, which is literal victim blaming, She blamed Recom for the sexual acts done with Clay. That is victim blaming. I'm gonna be honest, seeing not only one of the biggest creators in the community, as well as someone I considered a close friend, all of a sudden turning into this horrible and nasty person who fucking blamed victims, defended predators, put a huge void in my body, and essentially broke the last straw in the camel on my care for the wider community. Even if back then I thought it was denial talking, it was still hurting me to hear that from someone I really fucking trusted like this. There's more that radio did that I want to talk about, but since it comes up later, we'll come back to it. After the Clay debacle, we were promptly kicked out from not only conference chat, but the server, which, fun fact, I'm still banned on both of my main Discord accounts, and had to create a third alt to get back in. This is when me and Saren had begun our scripting for the Clay video, at least until Clay beat us to the punch in his infamous serious livestream. And oh boy, did this cause a fucking firestorm. Shit was going faster than I could react. Already, as soon as the livestream dropped, hashtag Justice for Clay was in people's names, statuses, and bios everywhere, along with people starting the Nobody Likes You slogan, essentially trying to say that nobody likes you, Nova. It's funny because my supporters actually ended up hijacking it and turning it into a sort of slogan that we rally behind, with me even changing it to my Twitter handle that month, and with it still being my handle almost 7 months later. But hold on, did you catch that? If so, good, pat on the head, come here. If not, well, fucking pay attention, bro, we're playing the fast game here. What you should have caught is what I said earlier. If you're liked or disliked enough, people will go against their greater judgment to hate on you or defend you, and that the community will go against their better judgment to get rid of anyone they perceive as a threat to the status quo. I was essentially going through what Forsaken was going through, but 10 times worse. By the way, remember what I said about Phoenix's mod team hating me for the Sarunia situation? They basically did the same thing for Clay, but much worse, saying that I only expose people for little things, and it's when I dislike them, or that I let RMWX off the hook, and that I shouldn't be the arbiter of right and wrong because I'm 14, and that I think I know more than I actually do, and my argument has no corners. Which again is really ironic coming from the guy who jokes about sword fighting with pedos in front of minors, getting to dictate what's right and wrong. And no, racism and pedophilia aren't any little thing, which is what I've exposed everyone who has had a video on this channel made about them for: racism and pedophilia. MSW, racism. West, pedophilia. RMWX, pedophilia. Sarunia, racism and pedophilia. Ooh, we got a package deal here. Plus, these people didn't seem to care that I was 12, 13, 14 when I exposed Western Mass, Easy West, MSW, Sarunia, and RMWX, but they care now that I exposed Clay? Did you guys catch that? This time I don't blame you if you didn't, since I said this all the way at the start, but this is what I mean when I say this community has never once cared for those who try to help and care for it, only allowing them to act as its circus monkeys before using them in their own twisted games and spitting them out afterwards. This is a fine example of that. So anytime someone tries to say that the community doesn't defend pedos, send them this video. And it gets worse, since people meat riding Clay wasn't the only initial reaction, but there was also a wave of intense racism towards me after the video dropped. Comments flooded my recent videos and community posts saying things like, "Get your black ass out of the community, holy shit, go back to Africa, this is why we shouldn't let some Chicago street monkey in the community, fucking nigger, go get shot in Chicago, you street monkey." Did you guys catch that? Like I said, there's going to be a lot of connections that you'll miss if you aren't paying attention, and this is one of them. That being what I said earlier, the first defense when encountering anyone who criticizes them that's a person of color is to attack their race. And this situation proves that. I mean, I guess it's no wonder when one of the biggest creators in the community goes unpunished saying slurs that the community joins in on doing it as well. If you're wondering what the whole frequency with them mentioning Chicago is, it's because, well, not only am I black, obviously every black person comes from Chicago, right? But also because to a degree I did perpetuate it myself by saying that I lived in Chicago to conceal my identity. Well, not my identity, my location, since not only is Chicago a city near me, but it's also a city I know quite a bit about and have spent quite a lot of time in and know quite a few people from, which is to be expected since I live in Illinois. It seems as if that cover location didn't work though, since my real address along with my legal name would become completely doxed when my evidence folder got destroyed. Now, there's no way anyone in the community could get a hold of my address. I never told anyone, I never showed anyone. The only people who knew my IRL address are my IRL friends, until MSW leaked my real address and doxed me and my grandma. And once you fucking know it, that same information, minus my grandma's information, was included in the fucking evidence folder, meaning this community had used someone else's crime to commit their own crime, which is honestly sad, really fucking sad actually, that the community would stoop that low. Not only that, but they would fill this document up with a lot of furry and foot fetish porn for some reason. Which, by the way, I'm a minor. I was a minor back then and still am now, and I'll continue to be a minor for the next 3 years. Sending porn to minors is not only immoral as fuck, but highly illegal. Ironically, the same thing I got on West for doing. Like I said, if you're disliked enough or liked enough, people will go against their greater judgment to hate on you or defend you. What's worse than that is that I wasn't the only victim of this. My friend, who I won't name for obvious reasons, got fucking DDoS attacked from this situation, and he barely even did anything publicly. Let me say that again. He was barely involved, yet he was fucking DDoSed. Looking back, it's a shock that I didn't leave that in there, but here we are months later, and this is one of my reasons why. If you thought the doxing and DDoSes were bad enough, wait until you found out that people accused me of sending pictures of my asshole to people. I'm not even joking. Look at this shit. Like, I don't even know how this ever fucking came to be, but I'm not surprised, seeing as, again, these are the same people who destroyed my evidence folder and filled it up with disgusting shit. So I guess once dumbasses, always dumbasses? Another event that happened a few days after that is where I was accused of being into fucking BDSM of all things. Now, I'm not RK, I'm not gonna sit here and divulge my sexual kinks or preferences to you guys, but one thing I can make clear right now is that I have never once been into BDSM, nor have I implied that I was, nor have I ever talked about BDSM during my time in the community. I hope you guys are having the same thought as me right now, and that's what's with this community and sexualizing minors whenever something happens to them. It's when you look at shit like this where you finally begin to realize why this community has so many predators and weirdos in it, and why I want to fucking leave it. After I released my video though, things seemed to calm down on the harassment side at least. People still thoroughly hated me and I hated them. Ace even came back and tried to slide in my DMs and join in on the Clay situation as if we were still friends, which is really funny considering that, at least as far as I remember, we haven't reconciled at that point. The most reconciliation we did was me going on one of his community posts and once again pointing out why he was flagged for repetitive content, and me saying that the Ace of Spades was my favorite poker card after he shared the Clay video on his community tab. Getting on better terms? Sure, but I wouldn't consider us friends again by that point, making it super strange that he was all of a sudden being nice and compassionate towards me. Keep that in mind next chapter, he does this a lot. But as I said, things sort of settled down around after the 30th, and while the witch hunt was still ongoing, there wasn't as big of a firestorm. That is, until I released my follow-up video. This video made me hate the community so much more, since after it dropped, everyone switched up. Sorta. It actually got a lot of people back on our side, but conversely, people began coming out of the woodwork claiming to be neutral, despite either clearly hating me and Saren or loving Clay, or not even looking over the evidence in the video, like a J-Man. With many still, even after the evidence being released, being firmly on Clay's side and continue to come after us. We cover this more and stop pretending like you care about Clay Ranger 143, but it was clear to see that everyone who was on Clay's side was only claiming neutrality because the situation had become less favorable to side with Clay. Since nothing I said was disproven by the doc, we actually thoroughly picked apart the doc and even went on to prove the existence of the ERP between Clay and Recon. It's kind of hard to look at that and still side with Clay, even though many still did because Clay had a bigger sub count than me, so obviously his opinion is the superior one, right? There is one good thing to come out of this situation though. It got the attention of Wes, who would begin to launch their own investigation into the Clay situation. And this would end up being the bombshell that took Clay down, but also what made me officially want to leave the community, since it proved everything I said before. Chapter 6. I wish someone could take the role of Joker and unite these lands. So, everyone knows about the Gwes investigation into Clay, right? Well, here's a question for you. When did Gwes release evidence about Clay? The 17th or the 22nd of January? If you said January 17th, you'd be wrong. Yet it was on the 17th where everyone switched up on Clay and his downfall came. Let me put that into perspective. Gwes, by the 17th, had only put out a statement regarding Clay saying that he would be removed from the mod team. There was zero reasoning why, meaning that their statements should have been as disregarded as mine and Saren's were, right? Well, wrong. People took it and fucking ran with it, calling out Clay, unsubscribing from him, kicking him from servers, warning others to stay away from him, and overall giving him the comeuppance he always deserved, which was cool to see since it meant that me, Saren, Diamond, along with others on the investigation like Chandler and Mr. Weather, were vindicated. Not really, but we'll get into that later. Meaning that the community could finally heal. But that leaves the question, why did everyone go after Clay when Gwes had no evidence? Shouldn't they have been treated similarly to you? Well, no. Hero worship and mob mentality is a hell of a drug in this community. And as I called out before, it's something the community is guilty of for the past 4 fucking years that I've been in it. It didn't change when Clay attacked us, and it didn't change when Gwes attacked Clay. In fact, you remember when I said we weren't truly vindicated for the Clay situation? Yeah, that's because people still hated me after the Clay situation, saying that I would milk the situation dry for clout, with even one of the Gwes moderators calling the situation between me and Clay an internet war. They have since changed that position and actually become quite a more amicable and open person with me, which I do really appreciate. But it just goes to show how much the community blindly hated me and the investigation team, even before the Clay situation, and how that hatred was so ingrained that someone who was, in all regards, on my side didn't even like me. That was actually very demoralizing, and even if the sentiment isn't shared by them today, really drove me away from the community and made it hard for me to trust Gwes when they first reached out to me, and afterwards, since I didn't really know if their intentions were as pure as they said they were. Then I began to notice people essentially forgetting about me, Saren, Weather, and Diamond, as well as Chandler, and only recognizing the actions of Gwes for, and no offense, essentially doing nothing by that point. Even when the evidence dropped, all it really was just a bunch of testimonials that had said what we had been saying for months. In fact, they even included screenshots from the confrontation we had with Clay. So if anything, people should hate them as much as they hate us, since they provided the same evidence. But people don't because, well, the hero worship and the mob mentality, like I said. Wes is everything short of an actual company/corporation. They conduct themselves like a real business, release very business and corporate-esque statements, and, well, they're basically a business. They're literally the global weather and EAS society. They have some of the biggest creators at their helm too. They're bigger and more known than Clay could ever hope to be. So in the eyes of the community, their words and their say trumps Clay's tenfold, just like Clay's trumped mine, not just in 2022, but in 2021 and 2020 before. It just goes to show that the community not only hadn't changed before Clay, but hadn't changed afterwards either. And that'll be further proven again later, which I'm sure you're tired of me saying, but once again only strengthens my case of leaving this place and it being horrible. Since, well, the hero worship didn't stop at Quest. Nah, continued when Harvester made his video, essentially recounting the situation and bringing everything to the table, as well as a warning against the very hero worship and tunnel vision that I pointed out all this video. Now, this isn't a jab at Harvester. Not only had he been involved with our investigations and proceedings into Clay since before we ever went public back in April of 2020, but he actually gave me in the beginning of the end the due recognition and commemoration, as well as some sympathies for what we went through in the video. And to be fair, so did a few of his commenters. Keyword, a few. The rest didn't even heed his warning, instead excessively praising him and just venting their hate for Clay without actually giving a care to the contents of the video, with some people even bringing up completely trivial things that Clay did and saying that the pedophilia was just the tip of the iceberg, or that it was just the start, which is fucking insane. Like, saying what Clay did was just the start, then saying that he stole his name and moniker as the thing that's somehow worse than the fucking pedophilia, not even paying attention to what the video said. That is a new level of petty, and people call fucking me and Saren petty. By the way, you guys know how I mentioned Radio's apology in the last chapter? Yeah, this is unfortunately where we have to continue. To preface this part of the video, I'm just going to be completely upfront and say that I have some very mixed feelings about Radio, and I'll be honest, I'm not even sure if I want to remain friends with her, but since we are still friendly at the moment of me recording this, I'll give her something I give all of my friends, and that's my honesty. It's not from just what she did in October, but also from what we're about to get into. Radio gives her apology in this video, but I'll be honest, her apology only really covers up to what she did in the recomp situation. Not what she did in conference, nor her completely blowing me off when I asked her to inform Clay of the DDoS attacks on my friends, as well as allowing me to get banned from her server for exposing Clay, even if she didn't ban me herself. Now, to give credit to Radio, she did apologize to me behind closed doors for it. Twice, actually. Her first apology wasn't even really an apology, actually. Mostly her just clarifying that she didn't have anything against me and didn't ban me. Her second apology, though, was actually a genuine apology for what she did to me and made me regain a lot of the lost respect for her. That is, until two events happened. One, people suggested that she private her scenarios done with Clay because of his wrongdoing. Now, say what you want about separating the art from the artist and that people who collab or associate with horrible people before they knew they were horrible and guilt by association or whatever. When these actions were suggested, she made an excessively big deal about it, not only in her server, but in Ace's and publicly on her channel, typing out a whole paragraph on why she isn't going to take them down and why people should stop suggesting that they should do so. This, aside from her 1.5 minute apology on another person's channel, was the only thing she ever publicly said about the Clay situation, which just put the most awful taste in my mouth. It's like her heart wasn't in the right place and that she was only focusing on the wrong things. Again, say what you want about whether or not she should have to private the scenarios, but you can't deny that when you've talked more publicly about that situation than you have apologized publicly, it really leaves a bad look on you and makes it seem like your head and your interests are somewhere else. This brought back a lot of the bad taste I had in my mouth prior to her apology. It only got worse when I found out about the second event of the two I mentioned earlier, that she only really apologized to me. She never apologized to Saren or Diamond for the way they acted in conference, just me. This really rubbed me the wrong way, since both Saren and Diamond were mistreated by her in the mod team, yet they never got the proper apology for it, which almost makes me begin to question Radio's intention when apologizing to me. That's not to say that I hate her or that she wasn't being genuine, but I won't lie and say that I didn't lose a lot of respect for her after figuring that out. And as I said earlier, I'll be honest, I'm still not sure if I want to call her my friend. How much of a friend can you really be if you just apologize to one friend you wronged, not the other two who you know the friend is really close with and one of them really looked up to you? It's overall just a really messy situation, and I brought it up because I'll be honest, when Saren told me about this in a call a few days ago as of scripting, it's probably like a week or two ago by the time of me recording, it was the final straw that broke the camel's back and made me start working on this video, as well as made me want to officially leave the community. It's honestly really sad and disheartening to see, since, again, Radio was my friend, my good friend, actually. And I had opened up to her a lot, so seeing this type of behavior, it's something I just really don't fucking get down with. It's something that I just can't wrap my head around. Like, this is the person who I was friends with. This is the person who I told about stuff that I don't even feel comfortable saying on YouTube. Like, is this really how bad the community is? Anyway, enough about Radio. There's another person who I want to mention who was also in the Harvester video, and that's Ace. See what I mean when I said he'd come up earlier? I want to talk about him because after the Clay situation, his behavior and narcissism really started to show.
You know how like a chapter or two ago I said he likes to scapegoat me and Saren for starting every argument and misconstruing everything we say? Yeah, that didn't slow down in the slightest after the Clay situation. Seemed like any time an argument started and I was involved, I'd be blamed for it, even when I had done nothing wrong or wasn't the only person involved. Yet I was still the only one punished. There are plenty examples of this before that come to mind. Our situation where I called out Harv and the same mod I mentioned earlier for ganging up on a minor in the server. A situation where Sarar was clowning the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force for their new mascot being an anime kawaii furry fox girl thing, and how I pointed out how this is actually common across a lot of militaries. Sarar and I getting into it in the server for me calling him out for never wanting to admit when he's wrong, such as the aforementioned Jasdith incident, and I only got in trouble for that. And then lastly, the fourth situation that we'll get into later. To break down each situation in a nutshell, the first situation involved Harp calling out this 13-year-old in the server for calling themselves a sub in their About Me, and warning them about how that'll attract pedos like a moth to a flame. Two things to say. One, if you don't know what a sub is, then good. You're probably still innocent and you probably should know what it is. And two, I truly have no issue with what Harvester said. It's something that actually needs to be said to someone this young. My issue is how Harvester was going about it and how harsh they were, but also the fact that it was happening in the server rather than in DMs or some other private place. I had just turned 15 not too long ago. I remember how it was when I was 13, and I've interacted with plenty of 13-year-olds before, and I can confidently say that blasting them in a server full of people and talking to them in almost a demeaning manner will not get them to listen to you. In fact, they'll more than likely just ignore what you have to say. Kids don't like to listen to authority, especially when it seems like the authority doesn't give a damn about them or what they have to say, and they especially hate to be embarrassed, as it only drives them away from hearing you out, which in some cases is necessary. Sometimes kids do need to be embarrassed to get the point. In this case, though, it wasn't really necessary to embarrass the guy like that, and I called this out, stating that I don't have an issue with the message, just the execution.
which caused the mod mentioned earlier to start going off on me and misconstruing my arguments repeatedly after I clarified them over and over and over. This would really seem like nobody's in the wrong, right? Harvin the mod did do something good by calling out this kid, even if I thought it was poorly executed, and I just called out that I thought it was poorly executed. No bad guys here, right? Yeah, well, guess it was blamed by Ace. Your boy, Nova, as usual, because I'm the fucking devil apparently. I even had to go into DMs to clarify to Ace that I didn't start it. How do you think he responded? Well, as a shocker, he actually sort of agreed with me that the mod in question went overboard, but then immediately went on to defend his reaction to the situation, which was him calling the kid a hypocrite for calling himself a sub and wondering why femboys get asexual rep, but we'll get into that later on. As well as making the excuse of his job and how he works a lot and he can't pay attention to the server a whole lot, which I pick apart many times and will continue to do so in this video. In my opinion, his knee-jerk reaction to people talking about a minor and warning about being groomed and how they present themselves attracting predators is to go, wow, this is really the kid who wanted to challenge what I said about femboys all being sexual, is very fucking tone deaf and self-absorbed, perhaps even narcissistic, because this is a minor being warned about the dangers of grooming, and your only thoughts are, haha, they just proved me right. But trust me, this isn't the only example I have of this, nor the only example of this type of behavior. There's plenty more, but we'll get into it later. The second incident where Sarar clowned the Jazzative for its redesign, and I called that out, that actually goofy insignias, logos, and mascots are more common than one would think in the military, using the 152nd Fighter Squadron in the US, for example, with their insignia looking to be Sylvester the Cat painting himself as a tiger and flying on a jet, because the squadron's nickname is the Tigers. I also brought up an example of a common medic pass that used to be used in the military with a girl like in a whole provocative pose and the text saying, the louder you scream, the faster we come, as a sort of dark sexual humor for the soldier to laugh at as he gets his fucking leg amputated. The kawaii/anime art style is literally Japanese. Anime originated in Japan, and the fox holds major cultural significance in Japan. So them changing their insignia from what looks to be a Nazi eagle to a kawaii fox girl seemed like a no-brainer, right? Just like Sylvester is a beloved character in America and uses our distinct 60s Looney Tunes X art style. Apparently not to Sarar, because all of this argumentation goes out the window, because earlier in the argument I compared the practice to how sports teams and video games have mascots and characters that make them more recognizable and stand out. So the rest of my reasoning goes out the window because you can't compare the military to video games. And when I pointed out how this was a blatant attempt at not addressing my point, I was called the bad guy by not just Ace, but everyone else. To me, even have to fucking explain a lot of the things I said about my combativeness in this video, because I was being needlessly combative. Again, I was just disproving what Sarar said, and I was being made out to be the bad guy. This is scapegoating, like it or not. And guess what? When I finally got fed up after Sarar made a quip about me not clarifying what I say or mean a whole lot, I went off on him, bringing up all of this, and I was once again told off for starting an argument. It's legitimately insane how much this gets said, and shows a lot on Ace's part about how much he truly cares about being fair and having a just community, like he says. Another more self-absorbed and narcissistic aspect of Ace is how he never admits fault but always expects others to, like me. Anytime I call him out about something that he could take fault for, he always replies that Discord is the least of my worries after a long day of work, or that I've been in work so long that I haven't got any sleep, which I'm not saying they don't suck. I know how much work can wear you out. Coming from a low-income family with a single parent, my parents are always exhausted when they come home. My brothers are always exhausted. Everyone's exhausted. But they don't use this as an excuse to not do the right fucking thing and pay attention around what they watch over. I find this excuse even harder, seeing as Ace still has the time to make those behind the screens videos where he interviews people and gets their perspective on their scenarios, the community, and overall themselves as the creator. In fact, Ace wanted to do a fucking behind the screens episode with me and Saren and essentially have us spill how we feel about the Clay situation. He also likes to argue with me whenever I fucking bring up femboys, saying that it's somehow against what I preach, that being the community being a less sexual place and making less sexual jokes, which I have always explained to him one of these two things. One, femboys are just that. Feminine boys or feminine men. There's nothing sexual about that. And two, I'm bisexual. I like anything that looks like a woman. I like anything that looks like a man. Tomboys, Chad men, trans men, cis men, anything. I like anything that looks like a woman. Trad girls, trans women, femboys, regular cis women. It's not even inherently sexual. That's just my preference because, again, I am bi. Ace, of all people, should know this, seeing as he is asexual and a furry. His husband is also a furry. They aren't sexual, they're both ace, just homoromantic. Furries have a rep for being sexual deviants and sex pests, though Ace and his husband are the furthest things from sex pests or deviants I've ever seen. So it baffles me how Ace can't seem to wrap his head around this concept. I also find it really fucking hilarious how whenever I bring up a complaint to Ace about his server, he doesn't have the time or energy to keep up with his server 24/7, but he for damn sure has the time to try to get me and Saren onto his channel for one of his behind the screens videos, and has time to argue with us about our attraction to feminine men, something which we don't have any choice or say over, by the way. It makes the whole exhaustion factor he brings up sounds like what I've been calling it, an excuse. And if it's not an excuse, then that just makes him even more self-absorbed and narcissistic. Because as I said, he can make time while so exhausted and working so hard to get us on his channel and argue with us about our preferences, but he can't do a damn thing for his server. He even does this when it comes to fixing the community like he agreed to help us do. I added him to a group chat with a bunch of major EAS creators like Radio Harvester, Ace, and even the Gwest Leadership Council, like Paul and Patrick. In this group chat, we would discuss things and ideas on how to prevent the degeneracy in the community and make people more aware of the warning signs of predators or predators in the making, so that a situation like Clay, Sarunia West, or RMWX can never happen again. We would discuss what we could do, how we could implement these ideas, and how we could follow them up and move forward, and how we can handle an investigation should another predator arise. You want to know the only people who said anything or brought anything to the table in the group chat? Me and Saren. Actually, Harvester to an extent, since he was talking about how the group chat could implement the policies that me and Saren discussed in our own respective servers, but other than that, nobody really spoke up. Gwest never did, Radio never did, and Ace never did, and the chat ended up dying, causing all of them to leave, which once again soured my view on the community and made me want to leave even more. I mean, how much do you really want to fix the community if you can't even speak up across a span of 4 months and give a suggestion on how to make it a better place? I called Ace out on this, and he employed the same excuse. Work, exhaustion, even bringing up how the group chat died as justification for why he didn't do anything when I brought up how he's been no help. Which is partially his fucking fault, by the way. It gets even worse when you take into consideration that I try to talk to him whenever he has the time, at least before I was banned from his server. I told him I wanted to talk to him and address this shit, and bridge the gap we seem to have between each other and clear up the things we don't see eye to eye on. You think Ace would like this, right? Seeing as he seems to think me and Saren are just overly combative for no reason, having a chance to go one-on-one, talk about each other as equals, and talk about the gripes we have each other, and work to either resolve or make a compromise would seem lovely to Ace, especially since he sees me as a good kid, right? Well, sadly that isn't how it went down, since Ace did agree to have a talk to me, but promptly banned me from his server afterwards, stating in his reasoning that I was an overly combative, alright kid, but that I needed to stop waging these little wars. It's almost like that's why I wanted to talk to you later and bridge the gap between us. It's almost like that I suggested we have an open dialogue later that night or sometime in the future, and that I couldn't at the moment simply because of a storm of shit going on in my personal life. No way. Now, if I were being naive or bad faith, I'd assume that Ace deliberately banned me because he knew I was dealing with personal shit and I wouldn't have the time, energy, or urgency to push back since I would be preoccupied. But I am not naive, and I am at least trying to speak in good faith here, so I know that's not why he chose to ban me. But it still leaves the question, why did he choose to ban me if he knew I was trying to talk it out and work on the reason he banned me? It does seem like really sketchy behavior and him trying to manipulate the situation. Even if that wasn't his intention, that's the implication it gets off. It gets worse when you realize that what we were being combative about was again not our fault, as Ace admitted himself. Me and Saren were saying nope to each other over and over in the general group chat of Ace's server, as a sort of chain like most servers do. We were doing it for a while, and eventually others from the server started joining in, and the chat essentially became filled with the server saying nope to each other over and over again. Ace himself even joined in at one point. So what's the issue? It seems like no harm, no foul, right? Well, no, because Snowboy would interrupt the chain posting a link about Pornhub leading Idaho because Idaho had passed some age restriction law. By the way, Snowboy would later admit that he did this half because he wanted to talk and half because he wanted to deliberately interrupt the chain. Go figure. Since we were already doing the note chain, we paid no mind to the article and continued until Harvester and Ace started talking about the article that Snowboy posted. And since, we were doing the note chain first and kind of just got interrupted, we continued the chain during their conversation. Is it petty and immature? You could say that. But I think it's fair game, seeing as we were pettily interrupted first. There were no issues until Harvester started to get on us about the chain, to which we pushed back on, saying that we were there first and it's not our fault. Snowboy posted an article in the general chat instead of using the dedicated news and politics channel or the second general chat, since the server had two general chats. Harvester then kicked both of us, since not only were we quote-unquote arguing, but that we didn't listen and continued the note chain. Saren would respond to this by putting Harvester don't be egotistical challenge impossible in his status, which apparently counts as bringing it out of the server and was ban worthy, but we'll get into that. We then returned to the server and called out the bullshit kick, even giving screenshots on how we were there first and we didn't do anything wrong, which is where Snowboy would admit what I said earlier about him trying to interrupt us, and even Ace himself agreeing that he did know why the article wasn't posted in the politics channel or general too. So the server owner agrees that we weren't in the wrong, right? No harm, no foul? Apparently not, since as I said, we were kicked and labeled combative. Remember when I said he would do this in 2022? Yeah, he didn't change in 2023 either. And yeah, Saren was actually banned for his status and what he said about the nope situation. Even if you don't see this as manipulative, which it clearly fucking is, him suddenly changing his attitude and declaring us the bad guys after previously sympathizing is at the very least very fucked and two-faced, and still doesn't make Ace look good in the slightest. If you still somehow don't believe that Ace is manipulative by this point, well, why don't I show you an example of unarguable manipulation? So you know how you said I wanted to have a dialogue with Ace, right? But then he banned me? Yeah, well, I had that dialogue anyway, though with a catch. I couldn't find Ace's DM with me. I either accidentally closed them, he did, or we accidentally unfriended each other. I'm not sure, but he wasn't showing up on my conversation list, so I asked Harvester to add him to a group chat with me so that I could not only discuss my ban, but discuss what I wanted to talk about before the ban. While discussing the ban, I brought up how I was sick of the scapegoating as well as everyone getting off easy and me having to be understanding of others and how they didn't understand everything about me when nobody ever paid me that same courtesy and tried to understand me. Right after, you want to guess what Ace did? He says he thinks that I don't take into consideration that not everyone knows what's going on in my background. Now let's get a replay on that. I said I was sick of having to get the short end of the stick in terms of punishment and having to consider that not everyone knows everything about me, while others don't have to pay me that same courtesy. And Ace told me to do exactly what I told him I was tired of doing because nobody had done the same for me.
This got me very pissed off, since not only did it reinforce how I felt about me always being expected to do everything and be the bigger person regardless of fault, but also showed that Ace either quickly forgot what I said, straight up didn't read or didn't care what I said, or misinterpreted what I meant. So I got fed up quickly, as you can see. Wanna know how Ace responded? Did he say, "Yo Nova, my bad, I didn't mean anything by it," or "I didn't see that, I'm sorry"? Nah, he started shifting blame onto me, saying, "Oh, don't start that shit, Nova. You're already exploding at me and didn't let me finish." Gaslighting is defined as an attempt to manipulate someone using psychological methods into questioning their own sanity or powers of reasoning. For example, they might tell someone they are irrational until the person starts to think it must be true. What Ace did here is textbook gaslighting. He disregarded what I asked him not to do, then tried to make me out to seem like the bad guy for getting angry when it happened. This is literally what abusers do, and I know that very well, not just from actual abusers in the community like Clay, RMWX, and Little Miss Devious, but also because some unfortunate personal situations that I've been in, as well as general common sense. Ace says it wasn't his intention to manipulate or gaslight me, but that's a common thing I've noticed about Ace. Nothing was ever his intent to happen or come across a certain way, yet it always ends up coming across that way. I feel like if your behavior comes across as manipulative, then even if it wasn't intentional, it is manipulative. I'll admit, I've been guilty of this with my friends. Saren and Diamond can even attest to that. I've said some things and done some things that I'm not very proud of. However, we've all moved past that and have worked with each other to move forward. Me and Ace? Nah, he continues this behavior. Not just in this instance, but later on as well, so I can't really move past it. Though, on a light note, for once, we actually ended things off amicably. I made my terms and peace clear to Ace that not only did I want him to consider everyone's perspective more and look into things more than just one side, to reach out to both parties in a conflict, but I also asked that he talk to or demod the moderator who berated me in the motor situation, since what he said about me was genuinely fucked, and Ace agreed. So I thought, maybe this would be a turning point. Maybe Ace would actually reflect on himself and what I said and actually do better for himself and how he conducts himself in the server. Key word, thought. It didn't actually end up happening, as we'll get into now. Chapter 7. Expired Visas. So, there's going to be a few callouts in this part of the video, since not only are they important to understanding why I left the community, but also because, well, they just happened recently. All of these incidents show me more and more how the community hasn't changed since Clay, and most likely never will. You probably know what I'm talking about, and that's because it's been sort of spreading like wildfire recently. It's the situation with Owen. Now, there's a lot of misinformation on both sides, so I'll stomp out the flame now. Let's get something very clear. Saren is not the instigator here. Owen commented on the video first and disregarded what Aaron... I fucking said what Aaron. Owen commented on the video first and disregarded what Saren said about Ace because there was no evidence at the time, and there definitely is now in this video. And Ace responded, pointing out how they're doing the exact same thing everyone did in the Clay situation, even calling out how Owen went after us during the Clay situation. Which Owen replies, "I didn't know who to believe at first," laughing emoji. I then replied and said all evidence will be provided in due time. Meanwhile, he can sit back and open his mind up instead of blindly defending Ace like he did with Clay, which he later got super pissed off and replied, "I already know Clay's a fucking manipulator." Which, I mean, yeah, I never denied that. I just said that you sided with him and weren't open-minded at all. That's when things snowballed out of control. Saren told Owen to get off his dick because he had continued to comment on the video, as well as begun making community posts about Saren, and Owen took this and fucking ran with it, saying that Saren said an NSFW figure of speech towards him to make it look worse than it actually was. Now, I'm sure you, well, most of you have a brain,
but this is a vast over dramatization of what Saren did. Get off my dick is just in a more aggressive and vulgar way of saying get off my back or leave me alone. The phrase itself is NSFW, yes, but the meaning, not at all. It's like telling someone to shut the fuck up. I think Owen is trying to pull sympathy points here because, well, they're a minor, so it looks really bad out of context until you realize that, wait, Owen is older than Saren? No way, you're lying, Nova. Well, nope. Owen's birthday is August 13th. They turned 15 in 2021 and 16 in 2022. So that means this year they'd be 17. For reference, Saren only turned 16 last month. He's going to be 17 next fucking year. I'm not sure where Owen lives, but in some states, they can directly and they can fucking vote in elections. They can legally work and drive and live on their own through emancipation. Saren, he's just now getting those privileges since he just turned 16. It's incredibly hilarious to try and pull out the NSFW card when you're almost a grown-ass adult and you're older than the person you're calling out. It gets worse when Saren points all of this out to Owen, minus the age part, and claps back with his own insults and things he has to say against Owen, giving him the chance to play the victim instead of just being the bigger person and shutting the hell up. The same criticism can technically be levied at Saren, but again, Saren was not the instigator here. Should he be the bigger person? Maybe, but I don't believe he has to, since in all reality, this was just fuck around and find out on Owen's part. Owen would constantly tell Saren to leave him alone, even though he won't do the one thing that'll get Saren to leave him alone. To leave Saren alone. That would have squashed the beef, but no, Owen just had to go on and throw himself a pity party. By the way, Owen says he never defended Clay. So if that's the case, Owen, if you're watching this video, explain why you privated the Black Moon on your channel the day the live stream happened, and only unprivated the moment Gwes stepped in. You know, the collab video that involved me, Supernova Hypernova, who was the main scapegoat of the entire Clay situation. Why did you leave the Black Moon group chat and unfriend me the day the live stream came up? Why did you only get on me for calling Dixita retarded when he defended Clay, but not get on Clay supporter for doing the same thing beforehand, as well as calling me a nigger and a faggot? In fact, when I tried pointing this out in October, you tried damage control, saying, I'm sorry for not thinking clearly or whatever. Now, I don't know about you, but cutting off your former friend, deleting all the work you had together, and only levying criticism their way while they were being harassed doesn't sound like neutral. It sounds like picking a side, which you did, Owen. He sort of admits this when he says, I didn't know who to believe. And while this isn't an outright admission, seeing as he never denied what Saren said before that, as well as the context I just provided, I think it's safe to assume who Owen believed. Owen would get his golden goose in the situation, however, and managed to completely turn the tide of the situation in his favor. And that's through, drumroll please, suicide baiting. Now, I have to address a few elephants in the room. One, there really is no direct definition of suicide baiting, only a few things on Urban Dictionary, and that's 1, encouraging someone to commit suicide, 2, using suicide to gain someone's attention or pity, and 3, the act of convincing someone that you just committed suicide or are about to commit suicide. Owen fits these last two bills perfectly. Why? Well, let's address the second elephant in the room. Yes, I'm aware, Owen has had a history of mental illness and suicidal ideation. I know this because despite what they'd want you to think, there was a point in time where we were friends, really good friends obviously. The fact that we made the Black Moon should tell you that we were at least amicable or liked each other. I knew about what he was going through and gave my bits and pieces where he could, but even back then he was being really scummy about it. He used to have a Twitter account where he would tweet and vent about his mental illness, and as you'd expect, there was a lot of self-deprecation going on, which I know all too well from my own struggles with mental illness. The thing here is, Owen would often employ the tactic of making a tweet saying that nobody cared about him or that he had no friends, but then completely muted so that not even his followers could reply. Then afterwards, when nobody would reply, he would put out a tweet complaining that nobody supported him or gave me any words of encouragement in his battle to beat his mental struggles. This is baiting for sympathy in its purest form. If it was just self-deprecating, I'd understand and even empathize with it myself, but I couldn't do that back then or now because, would you look at that, retweets and replies were off, meaning nobody, not even his followers, could reach out to him. No matter what mental spot you're in, this is an incredibly scummy thing to do, since not only does it continue your cycle of self-deprecation, but it also puts your friends and people who want to support you in an unwinnable situation, since not only will they feel hurt seeing you go through this, but also be hurt that they are powerless to do anything about it, since you physically aren't letting them do anything. It's a cruel thing to do, even though I do understand where it comes from. I always have and always will stand by mental illness or neurological disorders, never justify severe actions, only bring context and clarification to them, and this rings true with Owen as well. Them continuing their behavior from 2022 into 2023, but worse, since he was now blaming Saren for his mental struggles, really rubbed me the wrong way and made me lose nearly every ounce of sympathy I had for Owen, with me even joking saying that he's really gonna want to end it after my video drops. Now, was this in poor taste? Yeah. Was it necessary? Not really. Do I regret it? Not at all. Owen was not only repeating his blind hero worship and mob mentality from 2022, proving that the community hadn't changed, he's now also using his suicidality for sympathy that makes Saren look like a horrible person. There's no defending that. Now, here's where I have to address a third elephant in the room. That I was bragging about my former suicidality and waving my attempts around like it's something to be proud of, which, no, I never bragged about it or my attempts. I've been open with my battles in the past with suicidal ideation and attempting plenty of times before on the channel and even sometimes outside of the channel. I brought it up as a way to level the ground with Owen in case there were anyone or Owen himself tried to say that I didn't know how it feels to go through what he's going through. Essentially, I was saying, hey man, from the perspective of an attemptee and someone who was attempting themselves, I get how you feel, but you need to shut the fuck up. You're going about this in a wrong way and making yourself look like a fool. Owen, however, didn't seem to care about this, only taking the comment I made and running with it to Ace's server. Remember that place? Yeah, well, this is not only where Ace ties back into things, but also someone I used to call a friend. Planetary Evolution, aka Apache. So, this part of the script was basically going to be me pointing out things to clear the air before we got into it, but I realized it basically covered everything important or noteworthy that happened in the screenshots, so let's just roll with it. First off, no, I was not accusing Owen of saying slurs. If Owen wants to say retarded, that's fine. Since he's neurodivergent, I could give less of a damn. I was calling him out for calling me out for saying retarded, while not calling out Clay's fans for doing the same thing and worse. Forsaken is also allowed to say retarded since he is neurodivergent and has been medically diagnosed and also taking medication for it. Same with Saren. They are both neurodivergent and thus can both say retarded whenever the hell they want. 2. The whole rape joke thing Apache accused me of. This stemmed from Forsaken saying that Putin is raping me and me saying Putin is a rapist and he's raping Ukraine too. Now, I could see how this would be misconstrued as a rape joke given the context of the way it was brought up, but with the outside context that I'm about to provide, that someone like Apache, who literally became my friend after Saren introduced me to him, should know better and know about and know better than to imply that I was joking about rape, since I wasn't joking. Those are my genuine thoughts on the conflict. Actual real-world countries say that what Putin is doing in Ukraine is a rape and a genocide, and some has went so far as to label him a terrorist and Russia as a whole a terrorist state because of their terrorist actions in Ukraine, such as the Bucha massacre and the Privilia castrations, which, by the way, I brought up in Ace's server and thoroughly disavowed. Apache was even there to witness this.
Not only that, but I've made several videos and statements disavowing inconsideracies like making jokes or scenarios about the Ukraine war. For fuck's sake, Saren is an ethnic Ukrainian, and Forsaken is a Pole whose family was almost wiped out in the Holocaust and afterwards were forced to live under the dictatorship of communist Poland. By the way, the Soviets thoroughly raped and pillaged both Poland and Ukraine throughout World War II, even causing the fucking Holodomor, for God's sake, and they continue to act like terrorists in Ukraine. So if anyone has the right to make rape jokes about fucking Russia or Ukraine, it's Saren and Forsaken. And seeing as I'm friends with both of them and know their perspective on it, I'd say I'm within my rights to call the war a rape and a genocide. Apache knows all this, yet continues to ignore it simply because he didn't like me for an event that we'll get into soon. Third thing I want to address is a mod saying that I am a overly horny sex pest because of a nickname I had in Electric server. This was the moderator who, from earlier, was calling me out in the motor situation, so go figure. They say that I'm overly horny because of my nickname in the server is Alessia Wasea's chair, which I'm going to break down why this reflects more badly on them rather than me. So, who is Alessia Wasea? No one. She's a character from a novel that I'm writing. And no, I'm not sipping for my own characters, I don't have that big of an ego. I just chose that name because when I was in the server, I was literally writing down notes for one of her character arcs in the story. So she was the only and main female on my mind at the time, thus she became the namesake. So I'm not simping for my character, great, but you still haven't beaten the chair allegation, which I admit, it wasn't my intention to. I haven't been in relationships a whole lot since I am young, but there have been a few, and when they have happened, they've lasted for quite a long time. When it's broken off afterwards, I choose not to start looking again so that I can have some alone time. Something that I and many other couples do is, lap sitting. You and your partner sit on each other's lap for whatever reason. Now, I'll be fair, I know lap sitting can be seen as sexual and sometimes does become sexual, but more often than not, it isn't. Partners sit on each other's laps for all kinds of non-sexual reasons, such as just for fun, to tease each other, to cuddle, or because there's just legit no other space for the partner to sit. It isn't always sexual, and anyone with a partner would know this. In fact, sometimes people who aren't even dating sit on each other's laps. I have an IRL friend who is single, but she just lets this girl sit on her lap in class when she wants to. They aren't dating, it isn't sexual, they just do it. I myself am guilty of this. I have this guy friend who I'm not dating in the slightest since outside of the internet I'm sort of in the closet, and I still let him sit on my lap from time to time. It doesn't have to be sexual, and more often than not, it isn't. In fact, I remember saying to either Harvester or in Ace's server that I much prefer the romantic aspects of a relationship rather than the sexual ones, which includes cuddling, kissing, hanging out, and guess what? Lap sitting. This is why I chose the name Alessia Wasea's chair, because it sounded funnier to me than some shit like Alessia sitting on my lap or something. Instantly assuming a minor is being sexual about his nickname and his intentions with the nickname looks really fucking bad, especially when you are the moderator of a server that he has made his intentions clear in. Not even Ace assumed this much when he saw my nickname. He was just bewildered by it, which again confirms how I view about the community constantly making out minors to be sexual whenever something bad happens to them. Remember the whole them accusing me of showing my asshole to people incident? Yeah. Before we end this section off and we get into the meat of Apache, remember how I said maybe Ace would actually reflect on himself and actually try to do better for himself and how he conducts on this server? Yeah, keyword, I thought. It didn't actually end up happening, as we'll get into now. Yeah, this is what I mean. Ace and his server blindly took everything Owen spoon-fed to them and didn't give a thought to reach out to either me or Saren. Even though Ace apparently thinks I'm an alright kid, according to his fucking ban reasoning. Wouldn't you want to reach out to this alright kid and get his perspective since he's not looking like an alright kid here? He also never followed up on his promise since not only is that mod still a moderator, but doesn't seem to have changed or have been talked to, seeing as he continues to act like he did in October.
Ace also again never tried to stop any of this or caution others to look to what I have to say. Just continued to allow his audience to rag on us to the point where I had to ask Sarar in a different server to present my side of the story to them, which they promptly ignored, misconstrued, and took out of context, which is something Ace and his server does a lot if you've been paying attention, thus making me believe that not only has the community not changed its ways, but that Ace also lied to me in the group chat and that his word is not to be trusted. He is narcissistic, shows manipulative tendencies, and is a liar, which is quite the unfortunate turn of events, seeing as he was and is friends with a lot of my friends and I used to trust him and have a lot of respect for him. But whatever, life goes on. Anyways, I'm getting sick of this script, so let's just get to the Apache stuff. So with Apache, I'm gonna be honest, he was actually really cool at first, but he showed me a new and true nasty side to him that I'm half not surprised to see, half really fucking surprised, since some of this shit will legit flip the way how most of you see the guy. So I already debunked the whole rape joke thing, but as we'll come to see, it's more than just lying on people that Apache does. He's actually really hypocritical and a shitty person, especially to his ex-friends. We get a taste of hypocrisy from Apache when he goes off on me confronting this guy named Silly in his server. Now for context, Silly was someone who harassed Forsaken in Electric server by spam pinging him and posting a quote-unquote copy pasta where he calls Forsaken a variety of things such as a faggot, a retard, and a Nazi, saying that he doxed him and DDoS him and raped his mother. Really fucked up shit that you'd only expect to hear in a COD lobby. Forsaken noticed that Silly was trying to join Apache's server and thus called him out on it. I joined in calling him out, especially when Apache had muted Forsaken for posting a meme that said Joe Biden reportedly depressed, saying that I think niggas only voted for me because I have a big dick or something along those lines. And according to Apache, that violated his NSFW policy. This gets really interesting when you take into account that Apache hadn't even punished Silly by that point, even stating that he wasn't going to punish Silly because Silly was 13 and autistic, and because he was pressured into posting the copy pasta. Plus, he had already been banned from Electrics and Gwes for it, so it would be quote-unquote double jeopardy to ban him from his server. Now, I don't even have to explain why this is a shitty excuse because, well, we can all tell why, but one thing I want to focus on is that Silly apparently wouldn't even get a mute for what he did, but Forsaken was muted for posting the whole meme. Now let me ask you something. What do you think is more NSFW? Threatening to rape someone's mom or posting a picture with a fake quote from the president saying that his penis is big? Yeah, I think we can all agree on which one is more NSFW, making Apache seem incredibly hypocritical. This hypocrisy gets worse when he banned me and Saren from his server for going after Silly and getting on him for what he did because apparently we harassed him and that's against Discord's terms of service. You want to know what was really funny though? Apache was guilty of doing the same shit in Ace's server when this guy named Bacon was causing a fuss there, actually being worse than us, spam pinging him and even insulting his weight. If we want to bring TOS into the equation, this violates TOS since not only would it account as harassment, but also bullying an individual since he insulted Bacon's weight, and it would also count as threatening to harm another individual since he said he would fucking beat the shit out of Bacon, which is also against TOS. Now, let's clear something up. I don't think Apache was in the wrong for going off on Bacon, especially with how Bacon was acting and what he was saying. It's just if he's going to try to be a hypocrite and play the terms of service game whenever I do something less harsh, he can expect me to call it out. He tried to defend himself from this, saying that he only went off after Bacon had said NSFW things, which not only is him still violating TOS, but also incredibly hypocritical, since me, Forsaken, and Saren only went off after Silly after he said NSFW things. So, by all rights and counts, Apache has no room to try to talk or even talk down on me and call us pathetic for it as he does. Now, to be fair, I did apologize for going off on Silly to him, only for doing it in his server. I apologize for doing it in a server where everyone could see. I did not apologize for going off on Silly, since not only did I believe what Silly did was fucked, but also that Silly deserved it. Apache never owned up to anything he did, instead deflecting it or tried to justify it with the whole NSFW excuse. In fact, he continues this pattern of behavior, as we'll see in a bit. One more thing I want to point out is just how Apache tries to act like a fucking moral arbiter or something, since in the same conversation where he deflected, I brought up how that guy called Forsaken a Nazi, and mind you, again, Forsaken's family was almost wiped out by the Holocaust, so I told Apache to put himself in Forsaken's shoes and imagine how he'd feel. Want to know how he responded? I know how it feels to have members of my family killed by the Nazis. My dad's great uncle fought in World War II and died from a shrapnel wound. Now, I want to preface what I'm about to say by saying something. Apache's great uncle is a Chad and a fucking hero, and I hope his soul rests in paradise for doing what he did in helping free Europe from the Nazi regime. There's no denying that. His great uncle is a fucking hero. There's no debate. But there's no way in hell you can compare a soldier dying on the field of battle to a regime actively trying to wipe out your people, your culture, and even directly almost ending your bloodline. Now, I'd get it a little bit more if his great uncle was drafted, since he didn't really have a choice. But if he chose to fight voluntarily, then that makes the two even less comparable. Forsaken's family didn't have a choice at all, no matter what. It was just pray to God that the Soviets arrived fast enough to liberate their concentration camp before they were wiped off the face of the earth with no family or bloodline to remember them by, since they were also wiped out. That's like saying, oh, I know the struggle of racism and having family members killed by the Confederates. My great-great-granduncle also died from a bullet wound in the Civil War, to a person talking about how their triple-great-grandpa almost died escaping his master since he was a slave. You can't even compare the two. They're not remotely comparable at all. The fact that Apache even thinks he had a point here is fucking laughable. Now, you guys remember how I said Apache would continue his hypocritical pattern of behavior, where he called me out for harassment but then goes on to do it himself? Yeah, it gets much worse here. So, Saren reached out to Apache to call him on some of the shit he's done, such as the rape jokes, the hypocrisy, and other personal stuff between the two. Apache would say he's in a phase where he doesn't really fuck with us anymore, and Saren responded saying that he could care less. Wanna know how Apache responds? Alright, cool, go fucking vape some more and put some holes in your lungs like there's holes in your arguments. You guys want to know something about Saren? He used to be addicted to nicotine, and he would fulfill that addiction by vaping, and from what I remember, he's had that addiction for quite a few years. As of the making of this video, however, Saren has been working towards beating back this addiction and throwing vaping to the curb. Apache knows this since Saren frequently talked about it in a group chat with me, him, Apache, and the others were in. I don't remember if Saren's fully recovered or if he's trying to, but regardless, it is so incredibly fucked up and childish to make fun of a recovered or recovering addict, something they already hate about themselves, all because they said that they don't care that you aren't cool with them anymore. To remind you all once again, Saren is 16. You want to know how old Apache is? 20 going on 21. Imagine being so fucking pathetic and self-absorbed that you as a grown-ass man are using a high schooler's addiction as a way to make fun of them. He would continue to make fun of Saren's addiction after Saren called them out on it, even making a fucking shitty 2010-ass meme about it. This is the guy who was saying I was violating TOS, by the way, even though this is clear harassment and bullying. Not only that, but incredibly hypocritical, since he has the fucking gall and audacity to call us pathetic for going after a literal harasser. Once again, the community goes against their greater judgment to hate on the people they dislike. One more thing I want to note about Apache before we end off this section is that, well, he's a white savior, plain and simple. Oxford Dictionary defines white savior as a white person who helps non-white people ostentatiously or for reasons viewed as self-serving, such as being admired. This is Apache on full display. He'll go around talking about how Clay saying slurs is bad, or that he gets my frustrations with words like nigger or nigga being used by non-whites, since I'm a person of color.
He'll also try to act like he's the arbiter of what is and what isn't okay, seeing as he said in Ace's server that even if Owen did use slurs, it isn't nearly as bad as what Clay did. Which, side note, it literally would be as bad as what Clay did, since one of the things I accuse Clay of is saying slurs as a white man. This all seems like Apache is a good person who cares about the voices of people of color, right? Well, what he won't like you to see is how he, as a white man, uses the N-word behind closed doors. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest with you, I don't think Apache is racist. Not only do I not consider nigga a slur depending on the context it's used, but he used it in a manner where he isn't really saying it offensively. I do think, however, that this is insanely hypocritical, seeing as not only is Apache a white man, but also because of how he tries to, in the same sentence, talk about Clay and what Clay does. Which, mind you, by this point, both Clay and Apache have said the N-word. If this isn't white saviorism, I'm not sure what is. Apache once again proves his hypocrisy and how he has zero room to criticize others and shouldn't even be taken seriously. One more point of hypocrisy I think Apache has, and some might consider this an ad hominem, but it's how Apache will get on Forsaken for making jokes about CP and pedophilia, but is so obsessed with South Park to the point where it's his server profile picture and Discord profile picture. In fact, in our group chat, he'd often only become active when South Park is brought up. This is insanely hilarious, seeing as South Park is a show that makes jabs and jokes at pedophilia, rape, and child porn, such as, when there was a literal episode about Ike, a kindergartner, being raped by his teacher. Or how about an episode where all of the elementary schoolers are walking around with their asses and dicks out in a protest? Or how about the episode where Cartman rapes Butters in his sleep? The episode is more about Cartman proving that he isn't gay for doing that, rather than Cartman being just overall fucked up, as some try to argue the episode is about. This is a grown-ass man who apparently is all okay with all these fucking messed up jokes that South Park does. That's all tee ha ha. But when Forsaken, a minor, says that he loves kids as a joke, that's where you draw the line? Now, again, this isn't me defending Forsaken, since even I at times get uncomfortable with his jokes and probably call it out when it happens. In fact, we all as a group chat agreed that Forsaken needs to chill with the jokes, not only because how often he makes them, but also because it's just weird. This is more or less me pointing out a common pattern of behavior with Apache, i.e. his hypocrisy and his rules for thee but not for me style of conducting himself. It's hypocritical, pathetic, and deserves to be called out, especially when he acts like he's innocent and we're the evil ones. Epilogue, the role of Joker in the next round of Borderlands. The Joker, or the person who holds the card, is never fully revealed in Alice in Borderland. They only show up once at the end, once the game is complete, but only to ask the main character, Arisu, whether he appears as a god or as the devil. But the actual Joker, nor their place in the Borderland, is never stated. However, it is implied that they are the person who keeps the Borderland intact and makes sure everything goes as it should. For all intents and purposes, I, as well as everyone else in the beginning of the end, have been playing the role as Joker for almost as long as we've been in this community. We've been the ones making sure that whenever something bad or heinous happens, that person gets their proper comeuppance. And we even have a mixed reputation and view in the community, with some viewing us as saviors or protectors of the community for our actions, while others saying we're the reason this community is as it is, and that we've done nothing but harm to it. Or in a more symbolic sense, some view us as God, some view us as the devil. But akin to how Arisu viewed the Joker, we wanted to be seen as just neither. We wanted to be seen as the intermediators. We didn't want to be seen as perfect, gracious gods for doing what we've done, or seen as infallible like Clay was. We also didn't want to be seen as blindly evil for all the shortcomings and pitfalls we've had, or be scapegoated as the sole cause of issues. We wanted to be seen as what we were, normal people. Just like Radio, just like Ace, just like the President, just like you. We wanted people to recognize both our good and our bad, and not blindly see one side or the other, but to see both and recognize both. and see that like anyone, we aren't perfect. We're fallible, capable of doing good and bad. We're just intermediators. We're the Joker. But this community doesn't seem to have recognized that. Places like Ace's server or Clay fans, we were blindly viewed as devils, bullies, and people who do far too much and act like we're perfect, and people who have done far more harm to the community than good. In the case of places like radios or sometimes our own servers, we were blindly viewed as saviors, people who only did good and weren't fallible, and thus extensively went off on us whenever we did fuck up or have a moment of weakness. Nobody ever sat back and tried to realize that behind the persona of Supernova, behind Saren, behind Forsaken, behind Mr. Weather, behind Southtown Man, and behind Diamond Legends, there were regular people. Good, beautiful people like everyone else who are capable of occasionally being bad and ugly people. And for that, I decided to leave this place. This community has brought me nothing but sorrow, anger, frustration, and exhaustion, and it's changed me into a more jaded and cold person, as opposed to the idealistic and kind-hearted, innocent kid I was before. This community never once cared for me, even driving me and others back to the lowest points of our lives, even making me consider closing the curtain on everything entirely, something I haven't even thought of doing in almost 7 years. So, as I said to Ace, if I can't be shown the basic respect I'm asked to show in others, and if this community can't care for me and mine, then I won't care for it and give it the respect that it asks for. Respect is earned, it's mutual, it's not a given or a right, and this community has done nothing to earn my respect. It can't even change in almost a half a decade I've been in it, so I'm deciding to leave it. I do want to get a few things clear before I leave, however. Just because I say I'm leaving the community doesn't mean I'm completely abandoning this channel or EAS content. I love EAS scenarios and I love making them. I've wanted to do so ever since I was 7. I could never betray my younger self by giving it all up like that. However, I will not remain in many areas of the community, sort of like how SCP Hermitage does. I will only be around my server, my friend's server, and maybe one mainstream server, which will probably be only Electrics. Meaning I won't be interacting with the wider community, just my friends' individual communities and my own. I will also be dropping trying to help this community and expose the terrible people in it. I have one video planned that I will still release since I was working on it before deciding to leave this place, but other than that I won't be trying to expose anyone or inform the community since I'm done helping it. That doesn't mean I'll be an enabler or be completely silent about affairs in the community. If I see something in a server I'm in, I'm going to say something about it. And if it's bad enough, like what I'm known for exposing, I will make another expose. Not because I want to help this community, but because innocent children don't deserve to be hurt and traumatized for my own gripes. I'm not sure if I'll ever return to the community. I'm not sure if I still want to remain in contact with some other people in the community that I've become friends with. But one thing I know for certain is that for the foreseeable future, I don't want to be here. The only way I could ever think of returning is if the community finally snaps out of it, takes what I and many others have said into consideration, and improves itself and becomes a better and safer place for all. Even then, I might not return because this community has taken its toll on me. The only surefire way I'll come back is if this community devolves so deep into degeneracy that it begins to question the actions or even welcome back people like MSW, Sarunia, RMWX, West, or Clay back into the community, since at that point the community is so far beyond saving and repair that I have to come back. Even then, I won't stay for long. I'll stay to get them out, then leave again myself. Let this video be a lesson to newcomers in the community, while also a message to former and new members alike. Keep an open mind. Look at both sides of what you see and hear, and don't blindly follow or idolize anyone, even me, since even if they seem nice, they may not be nice when you peel back a few layers. And that is the exact problem with this community, blind idealization. That being said, I don't want this video to discourage anyone. In fact, I want to pass the torch down in this video. I want to encourage anyone watching to do what me, Saren, and the others have done alone for years. Speak up and expose these types of people. Don't wait for someone bigger to come along and speak first. Don't wait until things get worse. If you see something, say something, and ignore anyone who wants to go after you for doing so. Don't ever feel like you shouldn't be able to speak up about disgusting behavior of people in this community.
Tell whoever you feel safe with. Tell Radio, tell me, tell Saren, hell, even tell Ace if you feel comfortable with it. Tell Harvester, tell Glass, tell anyone. You are all the future of this community, and it can't keep going without your help. You have the power to change this community in ways you've never imagined, and that's why I've passed the torch down. Use that power to guide the community to the path of right action, and keep it safe from the various bad actors I've called out in the past. Because without the brave individuals like you and me, this community wouldn't have a future. It'll collapse under the weight of its own degeneracy. Don't let that happen. Be the change you want to see of this community. Even if it didn't work for us, it can work for you. You just need the bravery, the heart, and the pride for it. Other than that, I have nothing left to say. I'll be going on with my life, away from the community, and away from all the troubles and struggles that have come with it. I'll be walking down my own path and growing my own community from now on, removed from the cares and troubles of this one. Other than that, I'll be getting out of here. As always, this has been a star going supernova.
Let's go!